Good evening. Welcome to Audit and Governance Committee of BCP Council. My name is Councillor Marcus Andrews. I'll be chairing the meeting this evening on Thursday, the 28th of November. Before we proceed into the actual agenda, can I pass over to Democratic Services Officer to read out the housekeeping rules? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Please note this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. Unfortunately, we are experiencing some technical issues at the moment, so if this does affect the live stream, we are recording this meeting as a backup. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the Chair in case of disruption. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point, which is in the front car park of this building. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, that includes turning off microphones and volume down on your laptops. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Item 1, apologies. Do we have any apologies?
Thank you. We've had apologies from Councillor Vicky Slade and Councillor Michael Tarling. And
item 2, substitutes.
Substitutes, we have Councillor Tony Trent here for Councillor Slade and Councillor Joe Clements is here for Councillor Tarling.
Declarations of interest. Are there any around the table that people want to mention on items on the agenda later? I would say reference one item. We've got a presentation on property matters later on the agenda. I think it's item 7 or 8. I am employed in the town for a firm of commercial property surveyors, but this is basically a training thing. There won't be any decisions or proper debate, but I just would put that down for the record. Thank you. Item 4. Confirmation of the minutes. To confirm and sign as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of October. In terms of the substitutes, obviously, well, Councillor Trent, you were there, but would anyone like to propose the acceptance of the minutes?
I can't remember.
Well, it's all written down, even if you can't remember what we said. Right, and it's seconded there. Oh. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. It's a comment. There was quite a lot actually to take in with the minutes. It was quite a lot in terms of what we discussed. I'm wondering if for the future, if we could have some kind of action tracker that would sort of sit alongside the minutes so that we can keep track of what are the decisions that have been made and the actions. So it's just a suggestion really. Thanks.
Yes, obviously we have 2 types of meetings. We have non-core meetings and main meetings. Quite a lot of the things at the main core meetings are quarterly or annual reviews or acceptance of reports. But yeah, your comment is noted, and perhaps the officers could bear that in mind. Oh, Councillor Anna Connolly.
I was just going to say, I think that's a great idea. I'd really support that.
Okay. Is anybody agreed with that? No dissension. Okay. Oh, Councillor Beasley.
Thank you, Chairman. I was one of those who abstained. I would like it recorded that I'm abstaining on this occasion also, and I'd like to be named as one of those who abstained and is abstaining on this occasion. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Thank you for that. Moving on to public issues, to receive any public questions, statements or indeed petitions. I think we do have some public questions and later some statements. So Democratic Services, I think Mr McKinstry has got some questions.
There's 3 public questions from Mr McKinstry.
Okay, can you hear me all right, first of all, Councillor Andrews?
Yes.
Okay, splendid. Question 1 then. This is relating to item 6, statements of accounts, auditors' report, etc. Did Grant Thornton receive any extra payment for the feedback it provided relating to the 2022 budget and in particular the beach hut scheme that underpinned it? If so, what was the amount paid? And can you also confirm whether Grant Thornton's advice was presented in a report or a paper of any description? And if so, what was the date of any such document?
Thank you. Grant Thornton's 2020-21 audit findings report, finalised on the 2nd of March 2023, included a final fee for the audit. Within this, it included additional fees for value for money work for the year totalling £20,000, which covered a whole raft of additional value for money work undertaken in the year based on a number of risks identified by the auditor. The additional work included work on the proposed beach hut scheme and discussions with DLUHC on BCP's proposal, but also included a significant work on numerous other areas to conclude their work. There was not an individual amount for the beach hut scheme work in isolation. In terms of Grant Thornton's advice, they cannot provide advice to the council as this would compromise their independence. If they had concerns about potential decision, they would raise it with officers, but it's ultimately a decision for the council. The 2020-21 VFM Value for Money report of the 28th September 2022 details their consideration of the potential beach hut scheme. And I believe you've got a second question, Mr. McKinstry.
I have, but I've been advised that I'm being given a written answer. So do you want me to read the question anyway for your regular viewers?
Please read it, then people know what you're asking.
OK, regarding the controversial 2023 budget amendment, which was never in fact put forward, what exactly was this proposal and what were the elements that made it innovative and high risk? We know the then leader had a specific scheme in mind because it's described on page 60 of tonight's report as a proposed income strip of a council-owned asset that would have generated a capital receipt and a revenue stream. Was any file note or memorandum made of the meeting between Peter Barber, Graham Farrant and Adam Richins on the 13th of January 2023, where this scheme was discussed? And were any concerns relayed to Lee Rowley, Minister of State at DLUC, who rang Drew Mellor at 1:30 p.m. on the 19th of January, seemingly out of the blue, and wrote to him 6 days later, cautioning against a commercial scheme that carries risk?
Thank you. The question is not straightforward and will take longer than the relatively short period of time between the submission of the question and this meeting to prepare a response. The intention is to include a detailed response with the minutes of this meeting. And indeed, Mr. McKinstry, obviously you will receive a copy of that response. And as I say, it will appear in the minutes of the meeting, but I would also ask Democratic Services to circulate to committee members and indeed the two substitutes that answer when it is available. I cannot say when it will be available. Question number 3.
OK, this relates to the council's sale of assets in 2022-23, although it also overlaps with item 9, matters of governance concerning land disposals. Is there anyone still around who can explain why the Airfield Industrial Estate at Christchurch was divided into lots prior to being approved for sale by full council on the 10th of January 2023, whereas the Wessex Trade Centre and the trading estate at Willis Way were not? Just in case the answer involves value for money considerations, the guide price for lot 54 on the Airfield estate, as the agent dubbed it, was reduced from £510,000 to £275,000 in the week preceding the auction. And because this was an auction, bidding would presumably have started much lower.
The units at Airfield Industrial Estate were divided into lots because they are separate building/plots spread over the estate served by an adopted highway. And the recommendation from the valuer that undertook the Red Book valuation was to dispose of them separately to realise the highest aggregate price. Wessex Trade Centre, on the other hand, is an industrial estate where the 57 units and 8 terraces are intrinsically physically linked to each other, being served off a private service road system. They share the same access and the common parts are managed via a central service charge. And that ends the questions. Thank you, Mr. McKinstry. We do have now public statements. I'm just wondering, because the last public statement is from you, Mr. McKinstry, rather rather than dragging you back, we could deal with your public statements first, if that's okay.
Okay, I'm happy to do both in succession. They relate to separate.
Your public. If you do your public statements, then that will progress the meeting quicker.
No problem. Item 8, transparency of officer decision making and accountant. I beg your pardon. This is the question that was disallowed. I wasn't doing that on purpose. Public statements. Here we are. Item 6, that was right. Statement of accounts again. I was disappointed at Grant Thornton's refusal to issue a public interest report following the failure by officers to provide accounting records during the 2022 and 2024 statutory inspection periods. This in turn deprives an elector of his right to examine, query or object to the accounts, rights which are conferred by sections 26 and 27 of the Local Audit and Accountability Act. These rights, moreover, are valuable, as an auditor cannot study every transaction made by a local authority, and especially valuable against the backdrop of 2020 to 23, the abyssal period of BCP's governance. The incarnadine caveats swathing page 35 of tonight's paperwork, value for money for arrangements, auditor judgment, support this. I do note, however, Grant Thornton's concession in their letter to me of the 8th of November, that were the issue you have identified to persist in future years, then we may consider it appropriate to investigate further. In respect of item 9, matters of governance concerning council land disposals. The committee heard on the 17th of October that leaks of exempt information and associated risk management might be incorporated into tonight's presentation. Further information has emerged since then. There is no doubt, for instance, that the leak to the Echo concerning Wessex Fields came from a councillor, not an officer. This is supported by the monitoring officer's email to all members sent on the 1st of May at 11:44 a.m. in the wake of that divulgence. There is no doubt either that the Echo's initial claim that the site was being sold at an undervalue was totally untrue. This is supported by other correspondence, including a stinging email to Tobias Elwood from the Chief Executive on the 25th of May, obtained under freedom of information. I wasn't allowed to include the link in the statement because the council has no control over external links, but this is all on whatdotheyknow.com under Wessex Fields. Let's get these facts out there. The Wessex Fields leak was clearly a malicious attempt to taint the administration via misinformation, and the culprit is unfit for office.
Thank you, Ms. McKinstry. There are some other public statements. The next one is a public statement received from Susan Stockwell in relation to agenda item 9, governance surrounding disposal of council land and property. I don't think she is here this evening, so Democratic Services, you can read out the statement, please.
Thank you. Should disposal include entering into contracts for options to purchase as well as outright disposal?
Thank you for that. There's a further public statement received from Philip Gattrell in relation to agenda item 7, the review of the council's constitution. And again, he's not present, but so if Democratic Services could read out the statement, please.
Agenda item 7 includes the following Constitution Review Working Group recommendations. D. Appointment of committee member to review working group. The recommendation has complementary practical merit given the precursory nature of review group input regarding this committee's constitutional regulatory function. To consider any issue of council non-compliance with its own or other relevant published regulations. E. Necessary and consequential. Updates and revisions delegated to monitoring officer. This highlights a continuing misleading oversight in the Constitution concerning misstatements of the monitoring officer's reporting duties under sections 5 and 5A of the Local Government and Housing Act 1989 Act. Any residual doubts are dispelled by this resident's progressive public statements to the committee on the 11th of April, 25th July, and Council on 20th of February, 23rd of July, 15th October 2024. The correction is mandatory, not delegated. nor is it contentious in view of the unambiguous legislation and Ms Berry's conformity as stated in Birmingham Council's constitution during her tenure.
Thank you for that. There's also another public statement received from Philip Gattrell in relation to agenda item 8, transparency of officer decision making and accountability to councillors. So if you can read out the statement, please.
Ensuring the transparency and accountability stated at agenda item 8 is the responsibility of the 1989 Act Triumvirs, comprising Chief Executive, Monitoring Officer and Director of Finance. Since the 1st of April 2019, those officers' statutory and contractual responsibilities have been skirted by resisting correct and full statement in the Constitution concerning monitoring officers' 1989 Act reporting of contraventions of law, maladministration, service failures. Those immutable duties require the minimal text explained in my previous public statements. Obscuring councillors' awareness of officers' defective decision-making, thus also their performance and accountability, when, for example, 1989 Act reports have hitherto been omitted, with the single exception of a Section 5 report, arduously coaxed out by this resident. The current monitoring officer appointed in December 2023 will naturally, by statutory duty without fear or favour, action without delay the correct practices identified above. Accordingly, systemic weaknesses must not continue unbridled by councillors aware of accruing significant failings.
Thank you for that. That concludes public issues. So we now,
ask something about that. It's just that one of the public statements, the first one that was read out by Jill, appears to me to be a question. Maybe I've got that wrong. And I am aware that another statement.
your microphone is off.
I'm happy to respond to that.
Councillor, your microphone's off, so you can't hear.
Microphone.
Sorry.
Can you repeat?
I'll repeat, yes. I beg your pardon. Okay, there's a public statement in here, the first one that Jill read out, that it appears to me to be a question, not a statement. And there was a statement that was disallowed because apparently it had a rhetorical question in it. So I'm wondering why we have one statement here that appears to be a question and another one was disallowed when it apparently had a question in it, which may not have been a question.
Through you, Chair. So the person that submitted the public statement was very clear that it was not a question, it was a command, and there's no question mark attached at the end of that statement.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay.
Sorry, it just seems to me that someone made a decision either way on each of them, and it doesn't seem to be consistent. And I'd just like to make that point. Thank you.
There are a lot of questions and statements put in, and not all of the questions and statements are accepted. We, the monitoring officer makes decisions and guides the chair in those matters. Thank you. Items of business. Item 6, statement of accounts. This is to do with the accounts for BCP for the year 2022-2023. And we do have Mr. Peter Barber of Grant Thornton joining us online again. Welcome. Without any further ado, can I pass over to you to present this particular item, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good evening, committee. So item 6, statement of accounts on this evening's agenda includes a bumper pack of documents that we are required to discuss with this committee as those charged with governance prior to concluding our 22-23 audit responsibilities. The agenda is made up of a number of appendices and I will take you through those in turn. So starting with Appendix 1 that begins on page 19 of your papers. This is our audit findings letter for 22-23, which unsurprisingly is much briefer than our normal audit reports, given that we have not undertaken any detailed testing on your post-statements accounts for 22-23. Given the level of coverage and discussion on the backstop at previous meetings of this committee. I will take Appendix 1 as read, but I did, Chair, want to draw out a few specific issues within the detail. Specifically in relation to the two areas of responsibility that we have as your external auditors. Firstly, from an opinion perspective, the work in 22-23 was limited to our planning, so we did undertake some planning work, but it ceased at that stage once, through discussions, we concluded that it would not be possible to conclude the opinion work by the initial proposed backstop. Whereas in terms of our second area of responsibility, value for money, just to be clear in terms of this letter, that work has been fully discharged, and that culminated in our 22-23 Auditor's Annual Report, which was presented to this committee back in August 2023. That report can now be finalised, given that we are in a position to backstop the 22-23 opinion audit. So for completeness, included at Appendix 3 on this item is the final version of that auditor's annual report, and the only difference between the final version and the version received by committee back in August 2023 is the date. The only other thing I wanted to bring to members' attention is the indicative fee for 22-23 that is set out on page 24 of your papers of £72,360, which is our estimate based on the amount of time that we've taken to discharge the work for the year. And as ever, that is subject to public sector auditor appointments approval, and that compares with a actual fee for the prior year, 21-22, which was a full audit of £252,000. So this letter really does just set out the way forward to enable me to issue the disclaimer opinion, which I need to do ahead of the deadline, which is the 13th of December, and is subject to the accounts being approved and adopted this evening. So, Chair, that is Appendix 1. I don't know whether you want me to move on to Appendix 2 or whether you want me to pause there to take any questions before I perhaps introduce that to committee.
I've got no particular indications around the table. There's just one sort of general query or comment, and you can probably confirm it. These abbreviated or accounts here with the backstop, or however you want to phrase it, is for this financial year of 2022-23 only. The accounts to end of March 2024, that they won't be abbreviated, will they? You know, there'll be a full audit.
So, Chair, the one of the factors in deciding to backstop 22-23 was that it would in turn enable an early start on the 23-24 financial statements. So the 23-24 financial statements are subject to a full audit that commenced in early July and is very well progressed. And the deadline for that work is the 28th of February, and we continue to work with the finance officers to ensure that that deadline is achieved, and that will be a full audit.
Thank you for that. Margaret.
Thanks. On page 22 about audit plan, it says, due to delays in the completion of prior year audits, we're unable to issue an audit plan in respect of this audit year. And then somewhere further down, it says, no work has been done on this year's audit. So can you just clarify this year's audit then? Because you say you're already doing 23-24, will be 24-25 then? Can you just give me, it doesn't give a date for that.
So the audit is a retrospective exercise. These letters and these documents relate to the financial year 22-23. So when it's referring to this year's audit, it refers to the 22-23 audit, which is the backstopped audit. The current audit underway is the 23-24 audit, so the period ending the 31st of March 2024. The year we're in at the moment, 24-25, clearly has some time to run, and The council will need to produce accounts for 24-25. I think it's by the end of May 25, and only at that stage will we commence our 24-25 audit.
Thank you for that. Councillor Beasley.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a question for Mr. Barber relating to the audit of the Dorset County Pension Fund, looking to the future, and Dorset Council, because I believe Grant Thornton have now assumed that role for Dorset Council, and therefore the delays that we suffered here in BCP Council as a result of the audit on the pension fund. I'm looking for assurance that with Grant Thornton acting for both councils, could we have a more coordinated approach so that we don't suffer the delays because of part of Dorset Council's audit, and most particularly around valuations on the pension fund, which I believe was at the root of the problem last time. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Barber, can you give us any comment on Dorset pension accounts?
So Councillor Beasley is absolutely right. Grant Thornton took over the external audit of both Dorset Council and Dorset Pension Fund with effect for 23-24. Both audits are in progress. I am in constant contact with my counterpart who is undertaking the pension fund work, and that is progressing. And we have agreed that we are aiming to get a letter of assurance from the pension fund auditors, hopefully this side of Christmas. Work is still in train, and he is absolutely aware of the importance of me receiving that letter in a timely manner to enable me to conclude the BCP audit for 23-24.
Come back.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could just ask if we could have something to that effect recorded in the minutes, so that if we do step into any difficulty in the future, we've got something to rely on in terms of the assurances that we've been given this evening, because it could be quite some time ahead when such a situation arises. And I think it would be quite useful to have that aid memoir for members of the committee who won't be necessarily the ones who are here tonight, and indeed for officers of the council as well.
Okay, I think that's been noted. Thank you. Since the meeting started, Councillor Cox, who is the portfolio holder for finance, has joined the meeting. I don't know, Councillor Cox, whether you want to have any comment on the, obviously you weren't actually in office for the year ending 2023, but have you got any questions or comments to make?
No, the only comment I would make is that we weren't in control in that period, and so the in terms of the bad report that we had before us relates to the previous administration, and I'm expecting a significant improvement in the current period.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Barber, perhaps you can move on to Appendix 2.
Yep, thank you, Chair. So Appendix 2 that begins on page 27 of your papers is my draft opinion and certificate for the year in question. So this is, as I said in terms of Appendix 1, this is subject to the approval of the draft statement of accounts this evening at Appendix 5, and subject to the accounts being adopted this evening, I anticipate issuing this disclaimer opinion ahead of the 13th of December, I suspect sometime next week, which will enable you to incorporate it into your draft accounts and then get the final version up on the website in accordance with that deadline. So this opinion wording is absolutely standard wording that is being applied at all councils where the backstop is being applied, and just for that wider sort of background, there are a large number of councils that are facing this position where their accounts for 1 or more years are being backstopped. So there will be many sets of accounts with these disclaimer opinions in them after the 13th of December, and that will then, as I said, enable us to move on to 23-24, hopefully by the end of February. So within that, There is lots of detail in this opinion, but essentially it is a caveat to say that no detailed audit procedures have been undertaken on the financial information within these sets of accounts, and therefore, as the auditors, we are giving no assurance to the reader on the material accuracy of those disclosures.
Okay, thank you for that. Any queries or comments? No, nobody's indicating.
Sorry, can I just ask, from my understanding, sorry, I'm just looking at page 29. It says, under the Code of Audit Practice, required to report if they're not able to satisfy ourselves the arrangements for securing efficiency, economy and effectiveness. This is, we have nothing to report in respect to the above matter except on the 31st of August 2023 we identified, and then it sets out the significant weaknesses. How does that sit with the with the rest of what you were unable to do? Was that an active assessment that those weaknesses still stand from the previous year? Does that make sense? That would be helpful to clear up.
Through you, Chair, if I may. So in terms of the work that we were able to undertake in 22-23, we were able to do the full remit of our VFM responsibility. So that work was undertaken, and it was reported over a year ago in the auditor's annual report for 22-23. So in the case where VFM work does identify significant weaknesses, and there were a number of significant weaknesses in arrangements identified in 22-23. We report those in the auditor's annual report, but they are also explicitly referenced in summary form within our disclaimer opinion. So the opinion that we include every year within your accounts is an opinion on the financial statements, but it also reports on the outcome of our VFM work. So this narrative in here and the areas identified are summarised versions of the findings from that auditor's annual report for the year in question.
Okay, Eleanor, do you want to come back on that?
No, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Barber, you can move on.
Okay, so now we're on to Appendix 4. So Appendix 4 is the letter of representation. So this is a standard request that is made every year, irrespective of the backstop or a normal audit. And it is requested by us from the council, and it is final questions and confirmation from the council in terms of a defined series of questions. So this is the standard template that we request, and in order to issue the disclaimer opinion, I will need a signed version of this to enable for me to conclude the work. So this is there's nothing in here that is above and beyond in terms of representations that we would ask specifically for the BCP. It is the standard list of representations that we ask across our audit portfolio in local government.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or queries? No. Mr. Barber, you can carry on.
Okay, so I think probably Appendix 5 probably need to be introduced by officers, given that is the updated set of accounts that will be subject to this disclaimer audit. So I'm
okay. Can you prompt us with the page number?
So the page number is, bear with me,
91.
You're ahead of me.
Oh, Matt Filmer, I think you're online, so you can deal with this item, please.
Through you, Chair, and good evening, Audit and Governance Committee. So this is Appendix 5, which is on page 91 of the report pack. This is our statement of accounts for 22-23. So we initially set out the draft statement of accounts within the statutory deadline, which was May 2023. As Pete has explained earlier, this hasn't been subject to a full audit, but there has been a number of changes that have been applied to these accounts that are in front of us, some of which stem from the audit for 23-24. I think although we're not going to go into any detail in terms of the statement of accounts because they're a very technical document, what I wanted to do is just give assurance to the committee that in terms of the actual usable reserves of the council, in terms of what decisions the Cabinet and full council have made since these accounts have been produced, none of those reserves have changed. They remain the same. So I think if I was to provide any assurance to the committee, it would be on that. But I'm happy to take any questions in regards to those statements. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'm looking around the room. Does anybody want to make a comment or a statement? Councillor Phipps.
I'll just make a statement, I suppose. I'll say that page 100, it's got the latest capitalisation direction for flexible use of capital receipts. I just find it quite outstanding here. Amazing, really, that we've got, I believe, 46.93 million spent on transformation or capitalised use of receipts for flexible use of capital receipts for transformation. It's a huge amount of money. I suppose along the way over the years since 2019, we have been told somewhere along the way where that's gone. Just I'm just looking at this from a general point of view and how the public might have looked at it. What have we got for it? It's just a comment, really. The auditors did criticise this at page 20 in the previous appendix as well, in the outcome of this year's audit. And are we getting any better with this money, or what's happening? Because we seem to have this black hole that all this money is going in, and I'm just wondering, what have we got for it? Can we see what we've got for it?
Obviously, we are looking at the accounts for the year ending 2023. So, this document where you're picking up that figure is from that time.
In that figure of figure 7, and the total it gives 22, 23, 23, 24, and it will take us up to 24, 25, and the total is 46.93 of the 3 years.
Okay, your observation is noted. Chief Executive.
Thanks. Just to say, there is a report coming on the entire transformation programme coming to Cabinet in January or February that will set out 40 to 50 million pounds worth of savings per annum that have been achieved over the last 4 years, and will show where the expenditure has gone. So that's a report which we'll be bringing. We've been to review and scrutiny and explained transformation programme 2 or 3 times recently. No doubt we'll be doing that again on the way to Cabinet. So there is a report on its way through that will summarise the whole thing.
Thank you for that comment and guidance. Thank you. Right. No other questions or queries. Matt, back to you. Oops.
I think that's actually the report, Chair. There's nothing else other to add than just to look for the recommendations that are set out at the beginning of the covering report.
Right, Mr. Barber. So we've dealt with all your appendices and sections that you want to present to us.
Yes, Chair. That's the totality of the document. So it's really now, as Matt said, the recommendations.
Thank you very much. For those listening online, I'm sure they're watching online, we have a recommendation before this committee. I will read it out because not everybody's perhaps got access to the agenda. It's recommended that the committee, A, notes the ISA 260 audit finding report letter sent to the Chair of Audit and Governance Committee, Appendix 1. B, notes the draft audit report for 22-23 Appendix 2, which auditors will sign as soon as possible by the deadline of 13th of December this year. Notes the value for money report 21-22 and 22-23, previously presented to A&G on the 7th of September, Appendix 3. And D, approves the signing of the Statement of Responsibilities and the letter of representation by the Chair of A&G Committee and the Section 151 Officer, Appendix 4. And finally, E, approves the 22-23 Statement of Accounts for 22-23 Appendix 5. So I'm looking for somebody to propose that recommendation, please. Councillor Claire Waite, and somebody to second. Councillor Armstrong, you happy to second that?
I'm really apologise. I'm sitting here really trying to understand what's going on here. Having read the report from the auditors, there are there's some real issues that are identified. In fact, there are parts of that report that I think are quite damning, and listed from a perspective of how are we communicating this to residents, and what would people sort of who are lay people and members of our community, what would they be thinking, and how would they be understanding what we're actually talking about here? I'm not sure that I can second or support these accounts being signed off, because I'm not convinced, or I'm not clear yet, that the recommendations that have been put forward by the auditor, I'm not sure what's what will happen to those, and how they get actioned.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Richards.
Chair, if it helps, in the sense that I think tonight there's been some reference to the comments made by the external auditor in the value for money report for 22-23. I just remind the committee that we had a value for money report on the 23-24 position that reflected on how things have changed since 22-23, and this committee, I think, reviewed that in detail. I think it was in July, and endorsed that report. So I think it's that report that we looked at earlier in the year that almost takes us from where we were in 22-23 to the current position. Whereas this is very old, right? It's looking at the 22-23 and 21-22 position. So hopefully that gives you assurance on the journey that's happened since the 22-23 accounts. It's just that we got ourselves into that almost we're catching up because the 22-23 accounts was never audited because of those backstop issues and some of the issues that Councillor Beasley and others that prevented the 22-23 accounts from being signed off at the time.
Yes, before being comment, I think Mr. Barber will probably, and I think he has said to us already, some previous things are moving in the right direction. But Eleanor Connolly, would you want to second this?
Well, I'd be happy to. I'm not sure if I can remotely, but if I'm allowed to the monitoring officer, I'm happy to second it. So, and I'll say my reasons as follows: is this is very much just confirming these are the officer's proposals of the statement of accounts and the external auditor's view of that year, and we've since seen the progress that's been made in light of those findings. So on that basis, I'm confident that we have seen progress being made in addressing those significant weaknesses as set out in the external audit report. So that would be useful to confirm that the improvements in response to those significant weaknesses are underway, and we will be seeing the progress of them in this year's report later this year. So that's the first thing, just to kind of confirm there. The second thing is, I think that the issues identified in here are ones that we know about, and we need to get assurance on ourselves separately. So the obvious big issues are the dedicated schools grant, which has been very well flagged and we've talked about. The transformation programme, which Councillor Phipps has talked about. We're going to be separately briefed on the overall savings cost to benefit ratios of that over time. I understand from the Chief Executive, it'd be useful to hear on that, when would be a good time for A&G to sort of take stock of the transformation programme over a longer period of time. I think that would be a useful thing for us to do. But other than that, I think that the thing to do is to look to the future, and we'll see that in this year's latest report. One thing that I would say, though, is I think that there is a feeling of not wanting to whitewash over things that have happened in the past and just move on and feel like we're not really getting to the bottom of some of the things that happened in this year. And that's why things like future places come up with residents. So I'd be keen to hear officers' views on when and whether is the best place to feel like we are probably getting to the bottom of some of the issues that took place in this financial year, because we don't want to just not learn the lessons from them.
Okay, thank you for that. I should clarify that, Councillor Connolly, because you're joining us online, you can't second it. So I'll be looking for one of the actual other committee members here to second the proposal that has been proposed.
I really appreciate your comments, Councillor Connolly. That certainly has me feel much more comfortable, and I'm second.
Thank you. So we've got that proposed and seconded. And Councillor Connolly, yes, your comments that definitely, obviously, these are 2023 year-ending accounts obviously it's a long time ago, but what happened in that financial year, and if we can learn from some of those mistakes that occurred, which are highlighted in the auditor's letter to us, we should learn from that and not perhaps go down that path again and make mistakes. And you did suggest perhaps an investigation reference future places. We have had other investigations reference the seafront restaurant and everything like that, which is drilled down on what things have happened. Is that something that you would want to see happen?
If that's back to me, then yes, I think that and some of the other, or perhaps as part of a wider look on some of the decisions made that time that have had implications since then. I think any of those decisions that have had material costs to the council that we're now having to bear the brunt of, I think we should look into that and make sure that the systems are robust enough such that we don't see a repeat. So that is something I would definitely be keen for us to look at.
Okay, Councillor Phipps.
I would definitely agree with that, and as Councillor Connolly isn't here, whether it requires a proposal of any sort, that we do have that investigation and that report, I'd be happy to do that. It may not be the right time because you're in the middle of another proposal for this report at the moment. But if we're able to do that at some point, I'd be very happy to propose that, as obviously Councillor Connolly can't do that. She's not present personally.
I'd be very happy to second.
Yeah, well, I might need some guidance from the officers as to that suggestion, or the Chief Executive.
I think, Chairman, if I may, my suggestion would be that the members of the Audit Committee be asked to meet in an informal session rather than in a public meeting and have a conversation about that. We can talk to you about what's been done, and then you could decide which areas you want to look at, if any in particular. The best value notice resulted in a 44-point action plan that addressed a lot of those issues. It was off the back of those governance issues that were raised, and those have all been complied with to the satisfaction of MHCLG, so they've written off the best value notice. So my sense is we might need to go through that with some of the members that weren't councillors at the time in particular to understand that backdrop. If we can do that in an informal session rather than in a public meeting, that would probably be helpful because you could have a more free conversation. You could then decide if there's any issues you want to explore in detail, bring those through to a public meeting if appropriate.
Okay, that might be something that we could organise. Councillor Phipps.
I don't know, as I'd be happy with it just being an informal meeting. It just seems as though, it ought to be in the public domain, not just something that we talk about between ourselves, that's all. I'm not sure about that. I'd be interested in other people's views on that. Thank you.
Councillor Beasley, you'd indicated to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just for clarification before I do speak. So I think the proposal is that there is an inquiry launched into future places. Is that correct?
Councillor Connolly suggested that. She can't obviously propose it because she's not at the meeting, but Councillor Phipps, I think you made that proposal. So yes, it has been tabled. I might look for guidance from the officers as to whether that can be tacked on to item 6.
I might interject that I'm happy for us as councillors to have an informal meeting to discuss the scope of that piece of work and what we want it to include and what we want it to look like. But then I would like there to be a discussion in the public domain. So I'm happy to not to decide right now exactly what that piece of work looks like. To the Chief Executive's point, we can make it more specific than that. Yeah, but there should then be a discussion in the public domain about it. Yeah.
I should also emphasise that 2 normal members of the committee aren't here this evening, and indeed we do also at the moment have a vacancy on this committee due to the sad passing away of Councillor Castle, and that additional councillor will be appointed at the next full council meeting. So it might be more appropriate to await when we're back to full strength. Councillor Phipps.
I just wondered if we could put something in on this item as an additional proposal, and then it's at least in train, and it would come back to when we are, we're not going to be discussing it tonight, are we? And we will have a new member by then. So whether we could actually just put it in train at the moment, because it's not going to happen straight away, is it?
Rather than actually being part of the thing that we're actually going to take a vote on, what I would suggest is that it's recorded in the minutes that there was members of the committee wanting to have a briefing stroke investigation into future places, and the officers are willing to facilitate a briefing on that. Councillor Beasley.
So when I asked the question just now, Chairman, I said, could I come back and comment once that question had been answered? So yeah, what's being proposed is an inquiry into future places. I'm pleased to hear that the Vice Chairman has raised the issue of scoping, because that was the first issue I was going to raise. I would want to see that scoping to be as wide as possible. I'd also like to make sure that I'm part of that process within forming that scoping. And that it isn't something that's done behind closed doors into which I have no input. I think actually the proposer would support that in any case, and I'm glad to see that she's nodding to that. But just be aware, Chairman, that if the scope is as wide as I think it would then need to be, if it's to be totally transparent, it will need to make sure that it can call witnesses and that it can include the delivery of internal emails and all that goes with that. It is no good it just being statements that are uncorroborated by officers and by others. And I would be very keen in those circumstances, provided I'm part of the scoping determination, to support the proposal. Very keen indeed. I welcome the proposal, and I look forward to being a part of forming that and part of the outcome.
Okay, thanks for that. Mr. Richards, I think you indicated.
Chair, my recommendation to the committee would be to deal with this matter as part of your conversation around the forward plan, and to take this item as a separate issue and the recommendations before you. Clearly that can be something for your forward plan and for your discussions around the forward plan.
We don't have obviously the forward plan on the agenda this evening. It's normally reserved for our core meetings that the forward plan is dealt with. But to deal with the proposal and effectively the seconding from Councillor Beasley, I look for guidance from the officers as to whether we can nevertheless put this onto the forward plan. Can the monitoring officer, can you guide us on this? Can we add this to the forward plan?
Chair, yes, you can. This is still whilst you class it as a non-core or an informal meeting, this is still a formal meeting of the audit committee, and we can record it in the minutes that it goes into the forward plan. And at your next meeting, to your core, I think it's core meeting, it's classed as your core meeting, it will be picked up in the minutes and actioned when you debate the forward plan at that point.
Okay, so yes. Thank you for that. So if that could be done, and then particularly when we get to the forward plan at the next meeting, we can have a brief discussion on how we deal with this aspect. Councillor Phipps. Oh, Sam, sorry, missed you over there.
It's okay, thank you very much. First of all, it's a question for the officers, actually. On the subject of this future places, out of a percentage of 100, broadly speaking, how much do we know about the lessons learned already? And the reasons why I ask this, because you're getting into quite a conversation here. I'm very concerned if you trigger this meeting and an investigation, this costs time, this costs money, and what won't happen as a result of putting resources into this investigation. So if we know an awful lot already, I'd just like to understand the balance of going forward on something like this. If you could help me to understand what you know already, just broadly percentage-wise, that would be sufficient on this occasion. Thank you.
Chief Executive?
I mean, my feeling is that we probably know 90% to 100% of the lessons that came out of it. The key messages were built into the best value notice, and then the action points from that. The governance issues were picked up from that. We've done a shareholder review of the company in terms of the organisation and changed a few internal arrangements on that. So my sense is we know those key lessons. Of course, there'll always be lessons coming out of an in-depth review. Depends how far in depth you go. So we could do it. It will be resource intensive. Personal view is that's probably the least valuable part of the lessons that come out of the annual report and accounts, because we've done most of it. But we could do it, and maybe it hasn't been done in public in that way. So there is some value in terms of councillors' engagement, particularly councillors that weren't engaged at the time. But my sense is we know those, and we incorporated the key messages in. We had an MHCLG review of corporate governance, which included future places within that, and those recommendations are what we responded to through the Best Value Notice. So my sense is that's in the past, and we've done it. We've learned the key lessons. There may well be more as we go through detail, but happy to do it either way.
Okay. What I would say is we've got a proposal already made and seconded to accept items A to E. I think we should take a vote on that and then take a separate vote on effectively adding future places to the forward plan. So before I bring in Councillor Connolly, can we, for those here, take a vote on the recommendation which I read out several minutes ago, which has been proposed and seconded. So I'll be voting on this. All those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Any against? Any abstentions?
2.
2. That's been carried. Thank you. And then we've had a proposal from Councillor Phipps to have effectively future places briefing stroke investigation added to the forward plan. Councillor Beasley has seconded. So can we take a vote on that? So that's recorded, please. All those in favour? 1,
2, 3, 4, 5.
Any against?
1.
And any abstentions? No. Oh,
1.
Councillor Trent. Thank you very much. That's been carried as well. So,
Chairman, you named me as seconding.
Oh,
I thought, I can't remember who it was.
Oh, no.
I think it's a councillor behind me seconded.
Just to clarify, Councillor Armstrong seconded the main recommendation, items A to E. It was the second vote was on the future places briefing stroke investigation being added to the forward plan, which you supported that happening.
So I'm not being a pedant, Chairman. I'm just saying I thought that somebody else seconded. I didn't formally second anything.
Okay, we'll take that one again. Councillor Fitz has proposed it. Somebody second it. Councillor Armstrong is seconding the second proposal. We'll take the vote again. All those in favour of the forward plan having future places added?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Any against?
1.
Any abstentions?
1.
1. Thank you. Okay, that's done. So that's item 6 concluded. Thank you, Mr. Barber, for attending. I'll see you at the next meeting.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. All the best. Item 7. This is the Audit and Governance Committee Constitution Review Working Group. There are some recommendations from it. I will ask Councillor Connolly just to give a very brief introduction to it, but then we'll pass on to, I think Richard Jones is joining us online to actually go into the meat of it. And I think one of the items we're dealing with is changes to the planning committee items on the constitution. And I think we've got Wendy Lane, I think, joining us online. So perhaps, and hopefully Richard can pick this up, if we could deal with the planning changes first, and then deal with the budget meeting seconds. But Councillor Connolly, can you just give a brief introduction, please?
Yes, thank you. So at the Constitution Review Working Group, we consider proposals brought forward and there is a discussion around improvements that can be made to the Constitution. And as a reminder, if anybody, any councillor, any officer has any areas of the Constitution that they think could be improved, we are open to discussing. There's 2 today to talk about. One, obviously, Wendy will talk about. Secondly, we'll talk about first. The other proposal I'll come back to, but that is about the budget meeting specifically. So let's talk about the planning proposals first, and then I'll speak a little bit about our rationale around the budget meeting after that.
Okay, Richard Jones, do you want to introduce the changes of the planning, or would it be Wendy Lane leading on that?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. I think it's probably Wendy, actually, if you don't mind. And I think Janie Berry, I think, was in terms of the budget item, but I'm happy to contribute on any questions. So I think it's probably Wendy at this point.
Okay, over to you, Wendy.
Thank you very much. So obviously planning is a subject that has very polarised views. Lots of people often have a view, and therefore it's really essential that each council has its own scheme of delegation to identify the circumstances where planning consent decisions are to be taken by a planning committee rather than delegated to officers. It's impractical and unnecessary for councillors to consider all planning applications, and therefore the advice that we are given is that we need to, as I say, determine what is appropriate for the council. There isn't a national scheme of delegation, and rather it's something that each council considers is required for its own purposes, and there's the opportunity to modify or revoke the scheme of delegation at any time. What we have done very much is consider concerns that have been raised throughout the process, but most recently, actually since I joined the council, particularly the concerns were raised about the fact that only major planning applications needed to, where BCP council was a landowner or had an interest, only major applications needed to come, and therefore that was an area where the previous leader asked me in particular to look at. So we've been running informal arrangements whereby many applications have been referred to committee, and we've determined that we need to have obviously a more formalised arrangement. So we are suggesting that because the majority of council applications are minor and uncontentious, we need to consider the operation of how general kind of calling arrangements go for any other applicant. And what we've done is very much use that model, but had a higher test of it only having to be 10 or more referrals or representations that require kind of it coming to formal planning committee. So that's the aspect that we've looked under in relation to paragraph 22. The other changes are much more modest. We've added in a matter about reserved matters. So where planning committee has considered the outline, we are proposing that reserved matters are considered, but following the concerns that were raised at the consultation review working group itself, we are suggesting that there is the opportunity for members to be explicit at planning committee that if they don't want that to come back to them. We are aware that a number of outlines cover all matters, and actually reserved matters is often only something like landscaping. And if members don't feel that's necessary because they've got the framework within the existing outline, then again, that's clear for them to advise us how they want to work forward. There were some minor changes in relation to referrals applications by BCP councillors, and then an area that we were asked to look at very much as a result of going to the community and being out and about was about applications where town councils or parish councils or neighbourhood forums had raised concerns. We are currently not proposing a change, and that is because of the arrangements whereby only part of the BCP area has the benefit of those town and parish councils. But we recognise this is something that we will need to revisit. We are also likely to have to do minor amendments to the Constitution in due course when the Master Gov planning system is in place, because at the moment there are individual teams covering the legacy areas, and obviously we'll want to move that forward. So this is very much our recommendation for the moment, and we very much valued the input that we got at the Constitution Review Working Group. Happy to take any comments.
Okay, thank you for that. Indications, I think Councillor Phipps first.
Yes, me again. I am, as you know, on the Constitution Working Group, but unfortunately, due to some personal issues at that time, I was not able to attend this one. I probably would have put my views forward there. I just have a little bit of a concern about what are considered to be minor changes on the councillor call-in. it just seems to water it down a bit, as far as I'm concerned. To take away why the application is considered to be potentially contentious, I think that should stay in, perhaps. It just seems to now leave it with what is going to be B, I think, here. Why it's considered the application will affect the ward of the councillor, but it may not necessarily affect the whole ward, but it makes it very wide. Often issues are contentious, but in a small area, but it doesn't make them any less of a problem for certain residents who we are elected to represent. Some issues are very important, you know, for those that it's going to affect, although it may not affect somebody in the whole ward. So I don't quite like that. It just seems to make it, oh, well, if it doesn't affect the ward, then we're not interested. It can just go to delegated powers. I think it just waters it down, and I don't like that there, and I'd like to leave in the bit about it being potentially contentious, because sometimes there are very contentious issues that are more localised, and this doesn't seem to allow for that. Also, I know it's a different thing, but I did have a look at the transparency of officers in decision making and some of the slides in there, and it was quite interesting. It said officers should not make decisions deemed to be highly controversial, and decisions should revert to the relevant committee. And it actually says that in there, and I think that is relevant to this as well. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Trent, do you comment on this particular item?
Yeah, and on that particular part of the item, because I'm just a little confused as to what the changes are in councillor calling. It's something I don't use much, but I know that other people in the past have used it a lot, and sometimes in a way that doesn't make a lot of sense. But for example, I always call it call something in if I call it in subject to you know, being recommended for a grant or whatever. And one issue I had was way back, and it's sort of relevant to this, in as much as I had been involved probably about 10 years prior to that, when the residents did what was actually one of the first character assessments of their area, and it was accepted. And it actually had previously won a planning appeal. And when the planning application came in that was counter to that, I don't think there would be any reason in this that I could sort of call it in, but it was actually quite relevant. But the fact that the delegated decision was to refuse anyway, it didn't have to be called in, but it was something that my local knowledge, I'd understood that residents had done work on it, and it had actually been used in the past in planning appeals, but it hadn't been renewed by the council more recently, but it was still a relevant factor. And I'm just kind of wondering how that kind of thing comes into it, because a ward councillor has local knowledge that sometimes isn't always in the planning side. I've raised concerns in the past where there appeared to be a period of time where there wasn't an understanding of the 400-metre zone rule, and so I was potentially going to call things in on that basis. And I just kind of think that this almost, well, this looks very restrictive, and I can understand that, you know, there were some people, people are concerned about that, I'll call it in sort of thing, whether or not it's kind of meets any of the other criteria. But when there's actually planning reasons or historical planning reasons that something should be dealt with by the committee, I think that's actually quite an important thing, and I wouldn't want that to be lost.
Okay, we've got Councillor Connolly indicating, is it about this particular change for call-ins? Councillor Collins?
Yeah, so I think this is why it's really useful to have the discussion at the wider committee to learn from your experience. But I'll just set out my thinking at the time. So the previous wording was that for it to be called in, the following criteria are met, all the following criteria are met. And that is, in the opinion of the councillor making the request, the application is 1, potentially contentious, and raises material planning issues that affect their ward or would affect wider public interest. Now, to my mind, that "and" is really quite important, because that means it has to be contentious and it has to raise material issues in your ward. So for me, taking out the "and" potentially contentious actually widens it up. So now you read it such that all the criteria that has to be met is that, in your opinion as a councillor, the application raises material planning issues that affect your ward, or it would affect the wider public interest that warrants debate. So to my mind, it's actually a widening of what you could reasonably call it, claims the criteria to call it in. So I'd be quite interested in your thoughts on that. I'm open to the idea of bringing back potentially contentious, but to my mind, contentious is quite a loaded word. It's quite subjective, and just taking that out and saying it just needs to affect the wider public interest or would warrant debate and consideration is a wider and more well understood term. So interested in other thoughts on that.
Okay, thank you. Wendy Lane, have you got any comments to make to guide us what we should do?
It's very much the issue that's just been raised around the potentially contentious is a very hard to determine in planning terms, and therefore it's very fluid. So we felt it was much easier to be kind of more explicit. And as I say, fundamentally, for something to be considered, it needs to raise a material planning consideration. And then it's really for the councillor to determine if that just related to their ward, or is it something that's bigger that they feel that needs to have debate and consideration by planning committee. So we felt that this removing potentially contentious was assistive, and in a similar way, because of that, the need to use words like significant impact, or in the earlier section around a finely balanced officer recommendation, we also have the opportunity for the head of planning operations to call in issues if they're being flagged as a result of the representations that are being raised. So we felt we were actually making it much more explicit and making it more open for members around what they felt that was needed. So I am sorry if members feel that we were trying to restrict it. That wasn't our intention.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jo Clements, you're the Vice Chair of Western Planning Committee. You've got an observation to make?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, well, in my experience on the Planning Committee, it often offers councillor call-ins are result for a number of reasons. And I agree that I think the word contentious is not helpful. I think, in my opinion, it should be removed, because I think it's very emotive, and often planning objections in particular are very emotive. And I think using emotive language doesn't help any kind of committee to come to any sort of reasoned, valuable decision. But I think councillor call-ins are important. They're an integral part of the process, and I think that they should be encouraged. And usually the call-in is because of a very sound and important reason. And so, yeah, I think it's something that we should encourage and support, but I think it needs to be, as you say, more focused on material planning considerations and not emotive reasons, which, in my observation, happens quite often.
Before Councillor Fitz, Wendy Lane wants to comment.
Yeah, I'd be happy with that, and I'm not going to die in a ditch over the word contentious. Absolutely not, but I just think that this seems to widen it up. The effect will affect the ward, and I think perhaps we should have the words of material planning consideration in there, where instead of this, it's a bit watered down. Planning reasons that the councillor considers are material, I suppose, is one way of putting it. I just think, to me, it's if something's in a very small area and it only affects maybe a small part of your ward, it doesn't seem to be covered in here. That's all. It just seems a bit wide. That's all I'm saying. But I'm not too worried about the word contentious, to be honest with you.
We've got councillors here who've got, up all the years they've been sat on planning committee is considerable. But have you got any response to what Councillor Clements has said and Councillor Phipps, Wendy Lane?
So I was more going to come back on the issue that Councillor Trent was raising. So, and it does relate. So members can do a conditional call-in or an unconditional call-in. So they can just determine that the application needs to go to planning committee and they can give their reason. That doesn't need to be affected by whether or not the officer, either way of the officer recommendation. It is more normal that a member will say to us, if your recommendation is approval, I want it to go to planning committee. If your recommendation is refusal, I want it to go. But sometimes, because of that need to have that open and wide discussion of planning committee, they can say they just want it to go. All of those three options are utterly acceptable and clear in the calling form. So if a member feels it needs to go, it isn't dependent on what the recommendation is.
Okay, Councillor Trent.
Yeah, I'm actually wondering whether there needs to be an extra word, because what I was referring to back along as an example was something that affected about 3 roads, but it was a character area. A group of roads that had a similar character were, you know, the concern was that. So affecting the ward, well, you know, someone in Alderney West or something like that isn't going to be affected by the same thing that affects people in Branksome. But this was about a group of roads, and I just kind of think, or an identifiable part of the ward or something like that, because a lot of wards have areas that have got a particular character, and some of them are formally recognised, some of them have been formally recognised in the past, but it hasn't sort of carried through the changes of local plans. And I just kind of think that ward-wise, you know, there's a couple of miles plus between one end of the ward to another, and the characters are different all along, but there are certain areas that have certain characters, and I think that something a little more flexible than ward would be a useful thing. If that was added to it, then I would feel reasonably relaxed about the whole thing. But, you know, I just want to, you know, if it occurs in the future, I want to be able to kind of represent a particular area that's got a particular character, and it isn't necessarily a whole ward thing, because I don't think anyone's ward is one monolith that sort of is the same from end to end, or hardly anyone's area is. And, you know, I just kind of think that, you know, wards are comprised of separate communities and separate environments, and I just kind of think that that needs to be recognised in the wording somehow.
Okay, thank you for that. Before I bring back Wendy Lane to guide us as to how we could tweak this particular item, Councillor Beazley, you're indicated.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Certainly in my experience of planning, which has been predominantly on Bournemouth Council, where I was on the planning committee for a very long time. I chaired planning for 5 years. Everything always comes back, as it rightly should, to material planning considerations, and they will cover and mop up absolutely all of these other issues one way or another. Quite often it's about interpretation of those material planning issues, and it's for the committee to decide on the weight that's been applied by officers in their report and the weight that they attach to those considerations. So for me, all of this is covered in that sense anyway. And so the points being made by Councillor Clements in particular are totally valid. And are the ones that we should be listening to, Chairman. If we look at the wider issues about whether applications go to committee, other than those that are called in by councillors, those are covered. So particularly contentious applications, and I really am not terribly happy with the use of the word contentious anyway, are covered as reasons why an application should be determined by the planning committee without a member call-in. And so for me, I think we are in a good and happy position in terms of covering that off and getting the proper balance in there. Material planning considerations are the key to all of it.
Okay. Before I bring back Wendy, I got Councillor Armstrong indicating.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to check something. because one of the issues, something that is a particular issue in parts of my ward due to the densely populated aspect, and some parts of the ward are very overcrowded, is windfall developments. So I've just wanted to check that we're saying that it may only be a small part of the ward that's affected, but actually if there are lots of windfall developments, then there can be quite a much bigger impact. I'm just wanting to check that there'd still be the possibility of being able to call in or question those kind of developments. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Connolly, you next, and then Wendy Lane can guide us as to how we can tweak the draft we've got in front of us.
Thank you, but it's been really helpful. I might be missing something, but why could we not just remove most of it and just change it to, in the opinion of the councillor making the request, the application would warrant debate and consideration by a planning committee? Why does it need to be more complicated than that? Because that just captures the view of the councillor that for whatever reason it should be discussed by the planning committee. Interested in any reasons on why that wouldn't do the job.
Sorry.
We just get Eleanor to repeat her proposal because I didn't quite understand it. I didn't quite.
Yeah. So if you look at option A, it says in the opinion of the councillor making the request, the application, and then I think we should jump straight to the edit at the end. So it would say in the opinion of the councillor making the request, the application would warrant debate and consideration by a planning committee.
Okay, and that's page 237 of the agenda.
So that is, if we're making it wider to capture all the various reasons why a councillor might think something needs to be discussed, but it's caught in that, isn't it?
Councillor Waite.
Yeah, I would have to disagree with that, Councillor Connolly, just because it just puts, I think, ward councillors in a very difficult position when it's, I don't like this development and I want you to stop it, and actually, well, no, I can't. It's not a material planning consideration, but if that's not what the guidance is telling me, then I can't, I need that behind me really to say, well, no, there needs to be a planning consideration in order to refer it to planning. So I would not be in favour of that. I need some protection from pressure.
It needs the material planning so it's a material planning issue that would warrant debate. That would work, wouldn't it? I totally take your point. So it's merging the. But it should just be one sentence.
Yeah,
makes sense.
Thank you.
So maybe that's not helpful, Wendy. Over to you, what you think.
Can I revert to Wendy? So as I say, we're on page 237 of the agenda, paragraph 2.3.7. Wendy.
Thank you. So first of all, my understanding is the reason that it references the ward is because the expectation that in the first instance it would be the ward councillor that would do the call-in. It doesn't mean it has to affect the whole ward. It's just that the ward councillor is highlighting it's affecting their ward. And then the thing was, if a ward councillor considers another ward elsewhere in the BCP area that isn't their own ward, they think it's raising an issue that's of a wider interest, i.e. it's not directly affecting them or their constituents, but they think it's something that needs to be discussed. That's why it's framed in that way. And I have had some discussions from councillors quite recently around where they've been unhappy that non-ward councillors have raised issues, i.e. they've said, well, I didn't think that was an issue. I know my constituent much better, or know my area much better. Why is that councillor requested a call-in? Particularly if they haven't discussed it with them in advance. I personally am quite used to a situation where any member can call in any application in any ward, but it's really for you to determine if that's what you want, because obviously that isn't the current practice. It is that the ward councillors normally are the ones that do the calling, as I say, unless they think it's raising an issue that's worth the debate. I do appreciate the point that's just been made. We do need the raises material planning issues component in if that change to 2.3.7a is to be taken forward.
Okay, so to help us reach a decision on this particular item, call-ins, what changes to that draft document, Wendy, would you suggest?
as I say, I think the key issue is the practice that seems to state at the moment that the expectation is the ward councillor calls in issues remaining, or are you more comfortable to move to a situation where any councillor can call in any application meeting their criteria in any ward? And as I say, I don't think it matters from an officer point of view. It's very much on for members to determine their comfort with that call-in process.
Okay, so in paragraph 2.3.7a, where it's talking about the ward, can we have it now saying part or all of their ward? So the issues that affect part or all of their ward, would that satisfy people? So I'll read it out. In the opinion of the councillor making the request, the application raises a material issues that affect part or all of their ward or would affect a wider public interest that would warrant debate and consideration by a planning committee. Councillor Clements.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Why can't it just refer to the ward? Why does it have to refer to a particular part or something else? I think it's significant if it just refers to the ward and the impact that it will have upon the residents. And I also think that it should be left as it is, with just ward councillors having the ability to call in within their ward, because otherwise you're going to get a bit of a free-for-all and a bun fight going on, in my opinion. I think if anybody can call in anything anywhere in the town, in the conurbation, it will just complicate planning incredibly. Committee meetings will just go on forever and ever and ever. And I don't think it will be productive or helpful or useful.
Okay, Councillor Trent quickly, then I'll bring in Councillor Connolly, then perhaps we can try and reach a decision on this.
Yeah, I think A is fine, but it just needs, and you made a suggestion just now, if that was added to ward, that would make sense. I was going to come up with a proposal, but I can't quite decide on the wording, but ward, character area or character of particular specific area. I think character area is the nearest I could get to it, but just something that, you know, there's a reason why, and you know, every ward's got one. And you know, I know that you've got sort of old houses in an area, which is often taken into account by planning officers anyway. But I think that something that, you know, because very few things would affect a whole ward. You know, you can't say what happens in one bit, you know, is relevant to the rest of it. So I just think area with specific characteristics or something along those lines.
Part of all of their ward does widen it than what's being set out. So, you know, from the chair, I could propose that.
Yeah, that's fine.
And you're willing to second that phrase. Wendy, you may want to make a note about that, but it's in section A, issues that affect part or all of their ward. Councillor Connolly?
So I think that the issue is the and or. So previously it was phrased as the two criteria that have to be met. One, it was potentially contentious, and two, it raised material planning issues affecting their ward. Now because we're losing that and in the middle, now either of the criteria could met. So it's just either it has to raise material planning issues in your ward or the wider public interest. So this formulation opens the door to any councillor calling in for any issue. And I think we've just got a clear steer from the discussion that is not something that we necessarily want. So I think this needs to be thought of a little bit more. So I would imagine it would be useful to bring this back to the working group and perhaps invite some councillors with experience of planning to come and come up with another formulation, because it sounds to me like what we want is a rewriting of this section. Sorry, Wendy.
Well, Councillor Clements, you make a it's been proposed and seconded. Do you want to make a comment about that tweaking?
Could it say raises material planning issues that affect the character of their ward? I mean, just if that's the kind of thing that we're trying to focus on here, and affect the wider public interest, blah, 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 instead of or.
Sorry, isn't that quite a high bar then? Because it not only has to affect the character of their ward, but it also has to have wider public. There might be a situation in which it's very, very important for the character of a bit of your ward, but it doesn't also meet the criteria of having a wider public interest.
I think we're widening it with the suggestion that's being proposed and seconded. But Councillor Armstrong, would you be happy with that additional phrase, part or all of their ward?
I was just wanting to clarify something. So when we're talking about the wider public interest, for example, I'll just pick a topic like airport expansion or incinerators that would potentially have an impact across a few wards and might even impact wards, areas outside of BCP that councillors may wish to be involved with calling in or call for more scrutiny. I just wanted to check that we're not putting anything in place that would prevent that.
Well, I don't think on your point about, let's say, airports or incinerators or whatever, the other part of that all would affect the wider public interest, that they will cover the whole area. So can we move on? We've got lots of other tweaking of planning to deal with. Can we take a vote on what's been proposed and seconded?
Yeah, so we're not putting in about a character of the area, we're just leaving it as part, because I don't think it's necessarily always about the character, it can be about other issues as well. So
well, I think it is sufficiently wide.
As you suggested.
Just so we've got it recorded. We insert, the phrase part or all of their ward in paragraph 2.3.7a. So can we take a vote on that? All those in favour of that tweaking?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Any against? Any abstentions? One abstention.
1.
Thank you. So that's sorted, as it were. In terms of the other planning matters, there's obviously the reserve matters, which was talked about, and other matters. Is anybody wanting to deal with those, or are you happy with those other changes to the planning constitution?
Sorry, I'm a bit confused. How does that whole part A now read? Because I thought the contentious bit is the and the material planning issues. We've got to make sure we don't open the door to any councillor. We don't want to open the door to any councillor being able to call in for any issue, right? I understand how the discussion went.
As I understand it, Chair, it now reads A, in the opinion of the councillor making the request, the application raises material planning issues that affect all or part of their ward or would affect the wider public interest that would warrant debate and consideration by a planning committee. So it's still all.
Yeah, fine. So we've got the other items of proposed changes to the constitution. Because there's no debate or comments on those, can we take a separate vote on the other 1, 2, well, 2 actually, because there's no proposed changes to the referrals to town and parish councils. So can we effectively, somebody would like to propose, somebody to second it? Councillor Waite.
Sorry, can we just clarify, are we looking at the agenda item 7 and which recommendations are you referring to now?
Well, we've got, and I'll read, in relation to, I'll read it out, the proposal in the main part of the report. In relation to issue 2, Part 3A, Responsibility for Functions Planning Committee, the proposed amendments to Part 3A, Responsibility of Functions, are set out in Appendix 2 to the report be approved. We've taken a separate vote because there was considerable interest and debate on the matter of call-ins. What I'm asking now is for somebody to effectively propose that recommendation, which I've just read out, to effectively accept the whole of the recommendations
as amended.
As amended,
yeah.
Particularly on call-ins. So, Councillor Waite, you happy to, we got that proposed, and Councillor Phipps is seconding it. We can take a vote on that. All those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's unanimous.
Okay, that's unanimous. That will now go to full council for ratification. Councillor Beasley.
Thank you, Chairman. In order to try and prevent there being too lengthy a debate at full council on these issues when it goes there, could I suggest that there is a short officer presentation by Ms Lane, perhaps, or by the Vice Chairman from this committee, so that members can be invited and get those questions out of the way, so there's a proper understanding, because I can just see how much time this is likely to take at full council if we don't do that.
Are you suggesting a sort of a Teams briefing meeting for full council? If that could be possibly engineered into our busy schedule, that is a suggestion. The other comment I would make is quite a few of the groups on the council are represented around the table this evening. That please could you report back to your group at the meetings or discussions that you have with them, that you and most of you are experienced planning councillors anyway, are happy with what's being set out. Otherwise, we don't want to stay till midnight at the next full council meeting, do we? Thank you. So that's the planning changes done. We're now going back to the budget meeting, which is a fresh matter in terms of the meeting. So Councillor Connolly, can I revert back to you?
Yeah, thank you. So there's been a number of concerns raised by councillors over the last 2 years about some of the full council meetings running till very, very late, not being able to get through the agenda, having to have extra meetings arranged. We have, as you know, put out a survey to all councillors on tweaks we can make to full council, so things like the start time, how long before a break, whether there should be a guillotine, and how many meetings there should be in a year. So there's a sort of work stream that we've got going on into looking into improvements we might be able to make. What I think we're definitely sure we want, however, is a meeting specific to the budget. There's plenty to discuss as part of each year's budget, and it seems to make sense for there to be a meeting for budget matters only. So that would be in addition to the regular schedule of meetings. What we found last time was there was a budget meeting and then a normal meeting on top of that, which was too much for one agenda. So the point of this proposal is to create in the Constitution the idea of a separate budget council meeting, at which it would primarily just be discussed the budget, and that leaves the usual meeting in around February to discuss the other matters. So we're hoping that introducing this idea of the budget meeting in the Constitution, it does not preclude then further down the line making other amendments to full council and budget council meetings around start times and guillotines. But for now, let's just propose this one to have a budget only meeting. Keen on your thoughts.
Okay, thank you for that. Before I bring in Councillor Trent, Councillor Mike Cox, this obviously, if approved by full council, this will be your meeting. You know, and do you think this will improve the efficiency of the council to have a separate standalone budget meeting, please?
Personally, I think that would be very advisable. Everybody usually has something to say on the budget, or they should do, because it's probably the most important meeting of the year. So I would certainly recommend that happens if it's possible.
And I think a lot of other councils do it already. Yes, monitoring officer, sorry, first then Councillor Trent.
Chair, if I may, the vast majority of councils do have a standalone budget council. It is ordinarily in February. As it's detailed in the report, the plan is that the current schedule date of the 25th of February would remain as the budget council, and the primary reason for that is that my colleagues' finance department are already working to that date in respect of budget preparation. It is proposed, as it's detailed in the report, that we would ask council on the 10th of December to schedule an additional meeting of ordinary council, and that hopefully, subject to further discussion with council, would be the 11th of February. And I echo the comments from Councillor Connolly. At the last budget meeting that I was present at, the budget was one of 21 items on the agenda. And my professional opinion is that that does not offer significant time for 76 councillors to consider the most fundamental element of the council's work programme, which is setting the budget for the forthcoming financial year. I also think that we need to demonstrate transparency and good governance to our colleagues at External Audit as well, and this affords them the opportunity to observe full and frank debate around the budget, and gives them also a clear date to work to, rather than the risk of a budget being debate being adjourned to a future date, and that provides uncertainty for residents across the council. The other thing that I just wanted to add as well is that the creation of a budget council is also the final element of the budget and policy framework, which has previously been through Constitution Working Group and has already been approved by council and is now in the Constitution. So this is the final element of delivering the budget and policy framework element of the best value notice that you previously discussed earlier in your meeting, Chair.
Thank you for that. Councillor Trent.
Yeah, I completely welcome that suggestion, and for another good reason, and it's almost been referred to just now actually, is that there is a tendency for other items to get short shrift because people are basically, you know, their brains blanked out after sort of 2 or 3 hours of it. And in the past, it has been suggested, I don't think that's necessarily the case, but it has been suggested that contentious items are shoved at the end of a long agenda like the budget meeting, so they don't get the debate and so on, and it would remove any suspicion that something like that could happen. So I think it would be a good move. And also having, because I think I saw some proposed dates, having the full meeting before the budget meeting, then if there's anything in the full meeting that has a budget implication, there's time to work it out. So I welcome that.
Thank you for that. Sam Acton, one of our independent members.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think it's absolutely crucial that you all vote for this to be a separate budget meeting for the benefit of your public, your constituents, who might choose to become engaged in such subjects that can get so lengthy and carried away that they're just switched off. So for the, the purpose of engaging with the public and keeping something actually consumable, I would very much encourage you all to consider voting for this decision.
Okay, any other debate or comments? If somebody would like to propose it. And what I would say is that it will be recommendation A and B, and we might as well sweep up on that one as well, E, which is the necessary consequential technical formatting, if necessary, needed by the monitoring officer. Yeah, we've got D to deal with as well, and well we'll okay. Well, what we can take is probably a single vote on all this. Reference item D. There is actually a vacancy on the Constitution Working Party at the moment because Councillor Castle sadly passed away. I think Councillor Armstrong, you have indicated interest in joining the Working Party. So if anybody else wants to volunteer for that, please do so. But if there's no other suggestions or volunteers, if we could insert Councillor Armstrong's name into item D. And we have got a proposal from Councillor Trent to accept the budget matters. We've already voted on the planning ones. If somebody could second that, Councillor Waite, then we can take a vote effectively to conclude item 7 on the agenda. So all those in favour.
Chair, sorry, can I just be clear? You're voting on A, B, D and E, and E will apply to C as well, which you've already voted on.
Yes, and emphasise that E applies to C as well in case there are some dots and commas necessary.
And A, B and E also will be recommendations to council.
It will all have to go to full council. Obviously, when it goes to full council, hopefully there will be a single vote as opposed to numerous votes. We'll try and engineer a brief item on that, hopefully. So all those in favour as what's been proposed,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's unanimous.
Thank you for that. That concludes item 7. Item 8 on the agenda is a presentation, transparency of offer decision making and accountability to councillors. It's to receive a presentation of officer decision making, and Janie Berry, the Director of Law and Governance, is going to present a PowerPoint presentation to us. Councillor Wade?
Sorry, it's 7:15. Isn't that a convenient time to take a break, or is this next bit going to be fairly quick? Or
we've got another presentation after this one. What would members feel? A 5-minute adjournment and then come back to the 2 presentations?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go offline for 5 minutes and then have refreshments or whatever you want to do. Thank you very much. See you in 5 minutes, members of the public. Oh, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, I'll repeat. Item 8, presentation, transparency of officer decision making and accountability to councillors. I'll turn over to our monitoring officer, Jane Berry.
Thank you, Chair. I've been asked to give a presentation this evening on the transparency of officer decision making and accountability to councillors. In doing so, this is, and I make no apologies for this is quite a heavy reference to the Council's Constitution. So hopefully this will be quite informative about how to approach the Constitution, and it can be perceived as quite an unwieldy document. And I would always suggest that anyone who's looking at our Constitution never reads it from start to finish. You should be able to use it a bit like an encyclopedia and dip in and find the issues that you want and then the resolution to it, and it makes a bit more sense that way. I'm quite happy to take questions, Chair, on this presentation either at the end or partway through. I'll leave it for your discretion, Chair, if I may. So the issues that I want to cover this evening is really the theme of the entire meeting is around the interpretation of the Constitution, and as we've just seen in the previous item, it as well is about how we keep our Constitution up to date and how it remains meaningful and it evolves as legislation evolves, as members' wishes and feelings evolve and change and respond to the dynamics and our demographic. We're looking at types of officer decisions, as there are quite a few. We also have to look at the implications in the officer decisions, which includes the financial thresholds. We're going to look at the scheme of delegation that's contained within the Constitution. Sorry for the duplication of types of officer decisions. We're going to look at other forms of officer decisions and the decisions by statutory officers, namely myself as monitoring officer and my colleague Adam, who is the section 151 officer, who would write a section 114 report. So I apologise that some of these slides are quite detailed, but I'm hopeful that these slides will be circulated, so they will be slightly more informative if you wanted to reflect back and read them. So the Constitution is a public document and it is the Council's primary governance framework for the Council, both in terms of corporate and ethical governance. Ethical governance is around our behaviours, and the custodian of the ethical governance framework is the Standards Committee, and the Standards Committee works alongside yourselves as the Audit Committee, and collectively that introduces the Council's entire governance framework. I also want to say, and I constantly reassure everybody, the Constitution cannot afford to stand still. It is a living document that I keep it under constant review. Many of you will see that I've got a printed copy of the Constitution, and it is literally written all over with lots of notes and everything, because this is as and when I experience something, I make a note of it, as and when we need to update it. And so it's with me constantly, and it's like an aid memoir. Also, yourselves, if you make references to me or express concerns, I write it into my version of the Constitution, and that way work with Councillor Connolly and others in terms of ensuring that we have constant feedback on the Constitution. The Constitution is also a statement in that it sets out the rules and procedure for both officers, councillors, and also our public, and explain how the council business is done and how decisions are made. Some of these rules and provisions are required by law to be set out as they are in the Constitution, and others are the decisions and the discretion of BCP Council. Decisions are made by councillors both in public meetings such as this one and are also made by officers. All decisions are formally recorded to ensure transparency and integrity of our decision making. Here at BCP Council, individual cabinet members do not make decisions independently, though there is provision in the Constitution should that circumstance change. A key element around any form of decision making is also having at the forefront of any officer or council, or in this instance, a committee's mind, is the financial thresholds. These are set out in the financial regulations contained within the Constitution. And as this committee is aware, the financial regulations come to this committee on an annual basis for approval. So a quick summary, any decision that incurs £1 million or more is a council decision. The 500,000 to 1 million is cabinet, 100,000 to 500,000 is a corporate director, and up to 100,000 is a service director. In limited circumstances, as set out in the financial regulations, the Chief Finance Officer can make decisions regardless of the financial threshold. And the regulations also set out a number of instances when that appertain to decision making, such as fees and charges, issues around sundry debt, and a whole variety of other instances and situations which may occur and require a decision. So I would always strongly advise everybody to be very familiar with the financial regulations as they feature in the Constitution. The Constitution also contains a scheme of delegation. The scheme of delegation in our Constitution also includes a responsibility for functions as well as a scheme of delegation. This is found in Part 3 of our Constitution. This advises the public and our stakeholders as to which body, i.e. is it councillors, is it a committee, is it officers, that can make decisions and about which services and or functions. In respect of officers, the scheme advises of the seniority of the officer authorised to make a decision and or allocate certain decisions and functions to certain job roles within the council. The scheme also acts as an authority by BCP Council for officers to carry out designated or specific operational functions. The example I've given here is around the Corporate Director for Children and Families. The Constitution and the scheme of delegation authorises this corporate director to undertake all statutory activity required as the Director of Children's Services. The scheme is also a living document and it should remain under review as well, just as much as the Constitution. And this is because structures and hierarchies within directorates change, restructures happen, post titles change, legislation changes, for example, quite commonly around trading standards, and therefore it's important that we remain responsive and alive to those changes. Something called local schemes, it might be my terminology, but local schemes are created within the directorate. So when you look at the scheme of delegation for officers, for example, children and families, the corporate director or director of children's services will have a local scheme within the children and families directorate that allocates certain responsibilities to certain areas of that directorate for decisions to be made and responsibilities and delivery of services to be carried out in a robust manner. So local schemes are retained. We are required to keep those, and I understand that myself and both Nigel, the head of internal audit, do review the local schemes of delegation. A little bit more on the scheme of delegation. Just as Councillor Phipps indicated earlier, there are some principles around the scheme of delegation which everybody should bear in mind when making a decision. Just because there is provision in the Constitution for an officer to make a decision, this does not mean that the officer should always make that decision. So, for example, there may be some circumstances where either the issue is deemed or becomes highly controversial, it becomes political, then consideration should be given as to whether the decision should be reverted to a relevant committee, a cabinet or council. Clarity is also provided in the scheme of delegation around something called proper officer functions. Proper officer function is a phraseology that is contained within many areas of legislation, which says the proper officer for the relevant authority. And so the Constitution sets out at section 3, page 3-32 and paragraph 3.36, if you're really particular about it, a list of the known proper officer functions that we have. But in the absence of a nominated post holder, the proper officer will either be myself or the chief executive. Clarity is also provided about something called local choice functions. These are often not discussed. They're just either glossed over because there is confusion about what is a local choice function, or they are rarely used issues which crop up. Local choice functions means that it's an either or function. It is a function that could be a decision that could be made by the executive, or it could be made by an officer. And each council is unique, and it determines itself via its constitution as to the relevant body to make decisions about these particular local choice areas. So this is very much the discretion of the council at the time, and a list of these again appears in part 3. They are rarely amended or updated, but they tend to be quite static functions, so they're quite long-standing, and once in the constitution we do keep an eye on them, but rarely subject to any change. Types of officer decisions. So we do have your every day-to-day operational decisions, which is a kind of like the business as usual and keeping the business of the council running. Again, these are subject to financial thresholds as detailed in the Constitution, but all officer decisions require input from legal services and finance, and as an absolute minimum, to ensure it's legally possible to make that decision and ensure that we can afford to make that decision as well. And they will be signed off by a relevant director, or in consultation with the local scheme of delegation, the relevant head of service. Day-to-day operational decisions, these are slightly bigger decisions that are made, and they have to be agreed within a service plan or service budget. They're not in conflict with the budget and policy framework or other approved policies, and they do not raise new issues of policy. We make a record of all of these decisions, either they're retained within democratic services or within the service area. There is also something called major operational decisions. This is not a key decision which is likely to meet, and it is a decision that is likely to meet these 3 criteria. These are decisions which are published by democratic services because of as it says on the title, the major or the complexity of them. It is sometimes these major operational decisions where it may be felt that perhaps an officer should not be making this, and a decision-making function may, for example, transfer to cabinet. It is really important when approaching officer decisions that there is proactive consultation with ward councillors and cabinet. This is often something that I receive a number of comments on about either the lack of, or could we have more consultation with ward councillors, or how are ward councillor views fed back into decision making. So this is something that is a group of senior officers we have been raising amongst our director colleagues as well, and asking for information to be cascaded about what is meaningful ward councillor consultation. Why is it important? Ward councillors are directly accountable to residents and therefore should be fully informed of decisions which may have an impact on the local community. Cabinet members act as the portfolio leads, and they work with officers in setting policy and strategy direction. They also respond to media inquiries and general queries from members of the public and other councillors. Therefore, it's essential that they are informed and aware of the views. We have a committee management system and a report generating system called modern.gov, and this allows for cabinet members and ward councillors to review draft reports. So I'm sure everybody in this room is aware where they've received a report or you receive a notification in your inbox, and there is an opportunity for ward councillors to review draft reports and give views. Sometimes it's overlooked, but it's perhaps something that we want to raise as part of a member induction programme, just to raise its awareness. But hopefully this will, the proactive use of modern.gov and the engagement with ward councillors will strengthen the governance approach to officer decision making. And modern.gov does give a facility for ward councillors, for example, to give commentary on the report, just as if you're reading a Word document. You can add comments to it, or you can add a supplemental box when you give your views, so that we are aware of it. So there are some other forms of decision making. We have urgent decisions. These are made by the Chief Executive when a decision is required and there is insufficient time to refer the matter to Cabinet and or Council. The most common example of this is, for example, where we are at quite last minute asked to accept grant funding, usually within 7 days notice. And it is usually really important for us to accept grant funding coming into the council. And we don't have the luxury of asking for more time to convene a cabinet, for example, because that is 5 clear working days notice to publish the agenda. So as councillors in this room are aware, we do retrospectively report any urgent decisions made to cabinet and council. We can also make urgent decisions. They are made in consultation with the monitoring officer, the leader and the relevant cabinet member or committee chair and the section 151 officer, where there are expenditure implications as well. So we do put some safeguards around those. Emergency decisions. I just want to cover this off as well, because this is little understood. In terms where we have, as recently we've had some flooding, it is really important that those on a gold or silver command and supporting major incidents or local natural disasters, for example, such as the flooding that's happened, have the freedom and the ability to ensure that resources are available in order to respond and react immediately to the situation that they're presented with. So therefore, we do have emergency decision-making arrangements within our constitution, which under that gold, silver command framework of dealing with, for example, a flooding incident, we can get almost an immediate response and ensure that there is funding available or decisions are made really promptly to safeguard our residents, for example, or safeguard our property to prevent further damage. This is a little bit more detail on emergency decisions, again, for members to reference this at a later point, so I won't dwell on this one a little bit more. I just want to pick up as well, the final element is decisions by statutory officers, and I know that this is, I'm acutely aware actually, this is a theme of commentary that members have heard both at Cabinet and, at Council and at this meeting from a member of the public. I have two roles, as does my colleague Adam. I have a discretionary role, which is the Chief Legal Officer for the Council and the Director of Law and Governance. I also have a statutory role, and my statutory role is that of Monitoring Officer. And it is, I always prefer to be the Director of Law and Governance in my discretionary role, because it's a sign of healthy governance for the Council when I'm acting in my discretionary capacity. If I'm acting a lot in my statutory capacity, that does start to indicate perhaps some governance concerns as to why is the monitoring officer having to say this. The monitoring officer is concerned, the monitoring officer, and it kind of sends the wrong connotations. I can assure this committee that I have substantial experience of acting as the monitoring officer, and I'm acutely aware of my reporting responsibilities. For the purposes of information, I've provided details here. Where circumstances arise, I can issue a report pursuant to Section 5 of the Local Government and Housing Act 1989, where in the course of discharging functions, there is a proposal, decision or omission of decision which has or may give rise to the contravention of the law, i.e. maladministration. The report, once I've issued it, suspends the decision making in respect of that particular activity until such time as the report is being considered either by Cabinet or Council. There is a very subtle difference here, and that stems back to the type of decision that I'm concerned about, or the omission of decision I'm concerned about, and whether that is deemed as a council function or it's deemed as an executive function, i.e. comes under the sole responsibility of the Cabinet. either the council or cabinet must meet as an extraordinary meeting within 21 days of me issuing a report. Cabinet or council must decide whether to accept the Section 5 report or not. And prior to issue, I am required to consult, where appropriate, with the head of paid service and with the Section 151 officer. I have to advise you that in some circumstances, the issuing of a Section 5 report may also trigger the issuing of a Section 114 report by the Section 151 officer. This is quite a grave step to take. I appreciate, and I just want to, Chair, just clarify the position that has been made. But contrary to the comment in statements, I am satisfied with the current wording around the responsibilities that I have under the Local Government and Housing Act as it is detailed within the Constitution. I think that that is adequately addressed at Article 11, and I do not propose to make any changes to that at this moment in time. The final report that can be issued is issued by my colleague, who is the Section 151 officer. Again, Adam, my colleague, has a discretionary role and a statutory role. Adam's discretionary role is the Director of Finance or the Chief Finance Officer. His statutory role is the Section 151 officer. The Section 151 officer has the ability to issue a report pursuant to Section 114 of the Local Government Finance Act 1988. This report directly relates to financial matters relating to the council and has the effect of suspending decision making. That is all decision making, which may worsen the council's position. However, all decisions which have a final implication must be considered and approved by the have a financial implication, must be considered and approved by the Section 151 officer. The report, once issued, must be considered either by Cabinet or Council, again dependent on the function in question, within 21 days of issue. Council or Cabinet will be required to provide a written response to address and determine if the Section 114 report is accepted, and if so, what action will be taken to address the concerns that have been raised. Prior to issue, the Section 151 officer is encouraged, not mandatorily required, to consult, where appropriate, with the head of paid service and monitoring officer, though in my experience, a Section 151 officer does usually take up the opportunity to consult with the head of paid service and the monitoring officer. Chair, that brings me to the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions, or I'm happy to meet with members of the committee outside of this meeting if you want further discussion or clarification around certain elements, as I'm conscious of time this evening.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the comprehensive report presentation. I've got one query or statement. Halfway through, you mentioned about members could comment on draft reports on modern.gov. I didn't really know that was possible. The cabinet members particularly have been told that they can have their two pennyworths said on something, but is that something any of the 76 councillors can do?
No, it's not. If it's a ward matter, it will be linked to the ward issue. So we use it to consult with cabinet members in terms of the reports that we prepare for cabinet, and we can use the facility to consult where there's relevant ward issues. So no, there is an ability to tailor. So for example, if there's something in your ward, Chair, we would tick your name and you would receive an email that says we would welcome your views on this proposal. It is something that perhaps I might just pick up as part of the review of the induction programme and member training, and raise that with the Standards Committee, because they are the custodian of the induction programme and the member training programme at this moment in time. So it is perhaps an issue that we will just raise with the Standards Committee.
And obviously, clearly, it requires an officer to actually trigger that and send it to the members. So obviously, the officers are aware that they can or should be doing this.
We've given a refresher to officers as well, but we've also encouraged officers that they should proactively be communicating directly with the ward councillor, not just relying on a system. So, for example, if there is an issue in your ward, Chair, the relevant officer should be proactively trying to seek your views, either by email directly, by a conversation, direct face-to-face conversation with you, for example. We're trying to address this. It is a constant message, but I think it's fair to say that the three of us have are ensuring that we're trying to promote this as much as possible because it is vitally important.
Thank you for that. Councillor Trent, I think you indicated first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think that was a very useful report, but reference was made to consultation with ward councillors. In a former life, and if I get in a time capsule and travel about 10 years, I'll roughly explain the thing. I used to feel that as a ward councillor, I knew what was going on. I've raised several issues in several different directions over the BCP years, and I don't feel that it's a standard practice anymore for ward councillors to be involved in everything. And it's really embarrassing if a member of the public phones you up and said, what's going on? Why is this happening? You said, well, what is happening, sort of thing. And there are occasions when we will get told about something half an hour after I've read it in the Echo and things like that. And I do think that, and this possibly goes into the induction that was referred to just now, that it's a relatively straightforward thing to let ward councillors know what's going on. And I do think that we should be informed of things that are going on, quite a wide range of things, because I, for example, everyone knows my telephone number, they know my email address. I'll get a phone call about something if I don't know what's going on. And I don't think I'm the only ward councillor that has that issue. And it's certainly a deterioration to what I was used to several years ago. And although it's got slightly better in since BCP was formed, it's still a problem. And I'm just wondering whether perhaps that can be borne in mind when it comes to induction of staff and so on, and staff training, that the ward councillors should be engaged, because more often than not, we are the first port of call for residents. They will go to one of us if there's an issue, and if we don't actually know what's happening or what was planned, I know it's not always the fault of the officers, because I had a case recently when it turned out that some organisation contacted the Echo before they contacted the council. So, but I do think it is an area that does need to be tightened up a bit.
Do you want to come back on that?
Chair, I agree. We actually do have quite a high staff turnover, which is part of the difficulty as well, because by the time you've said the message, the same staff may have left and moved on. And so it is a constant message that we do need to keep providing to the directors to cascade across their teams. So yes, take that on board. Thank you.
Councillor Waite, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question regarding slide 7 of your presentation. We go from day-to-day operational decision, and then on number 8 we've got major operational decision, which is not a key decision, and I kind of missed a bit about what a key decision is. So could you try to explain to me like the hierarchy of decisions, if you can?
Yes. So day-to-day, the day-to-day operational decisions would be effectively carrying out decisions post-cabinet, making recommendations to the directors to can you proceed with X, Y, and Z. It's the decisions that fall out of a cabinet decision. Some of that would be day-to-day. The major decisions are probably where they've not been to cabinet, it's slightly more impactful. So I am going to be quite controversial, but Pool Park closure, there was a debate whether should that be a major operational decision for a member of staff to take, or should it come to cabinet? And actually, because of the wealth of feeling, the complexity, the sensitivity in the area, whilst it could have been made by an officer, because it fell within the threshold, actually it was more prudent for cabinet to take that decision. So you have to look at it on a case by case basis. It is not fair to say that there is a set of decisions that fall into major operational decisions, because they're actually quite rare.
I think it was that line on the top of slide 8, a major operational decision is an officer decision which is not a key decision. So what does that mean? Was there a, I felt like, I'm sure there isn't, it's just me misunderstanding. So I felt like there was a slide missing to explain.
Oh, sorry, key decision. So key decisions usually affect 2 or more wards. They have quite a significant budgetary impact, or they are a very complicated decision that has quite a profound impact on the council. So I can, before circulation, Chair, I can amend these slides and put in a slide on a definition of a key decision, if that would be helpful, so that this is like an information document that you can take away. So I can do that and put an additional slide in to help you, Councillor. So the key decision, the financial figure here for BCP is 500,000.
Councillor Beasley, I think you indicated next.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I've got 2 points. The first follows on from what Councillor Trent was saying a moment ago in terms of consultation with ward members. Most of these issues are non-key decisions, but sometimes they do include 2 wards. But I think my point is a bit wider than that, in the sense of the induction of officers, because this should be a default position automatically, the issue of ward councillor consultation. And I've had a number of instances in my own ward and in the adjoining ward where this simply hasn't been happening. And Councillor Trent's absolutely right. One hears about it from third parties, either by other residents or businesses in the ward, or through the pages of the Daily Echo. It's just not good enough. And of course, once that's happened, it's too late to do anything about it. And ward members don't look particularly clever if they are the last to know. So that does need to be tightened up, but it should be part of the induction process. So there should be no excuse, in my opinion, and there never used to be any excuse for officers not complying with that protocol. The second one is taking to the end of the slides. I note the last slide around decisions by statutory officers and the sanctions that can be employed as a result. What I'm quite interested in is what sanctions are available to members, both internally and externally to the council, if one has challenge to decisions that have been made by officers. And I wouldn't include in that, in the context that I'm thinking of, referring to the external auditors, but I want to know internally to the council what sanctions are available in addition to and exclusive of the monitoring officer. And secondly, external to the council, what route is available to members if there is no satisfaction to those questions. Because my experience, Chairman, has been that there isn't one. And that councillors individually are on their own at that stage, but with nobody to refer to. And I'm interested in both of those to find out what the monitoring officer has to feed back to me, and that can then perhaps be included in these slides when they're released.
Jenny Berry?
So the primary sanction that is available outside of the council dynamic is that the decisions of the council can be judicially reviewed. So there is an option for any person, stakeholder or a councillor to judicially review a decision if you feel uncomfortable, if you've exhausted the framework around looking at the decisions. In terms of challenging the decisions, what we have to look at as well are also the access to information rules. There are some areas where members may have to satisfy the access to information rules as to why do you need to know. There may be issues of confidentiality where we have to refuse disclosure of certain information, and again those rules are set out in the Constitution. The other element around challenging decisions is that the council does have an overview and scrutiny framework, which I think is quite advanced in this council as well, and there is an ability for scrutiny to get involved in some work. Now, a lot of the officer decisions are not the subject of scrutiny by councillors. the decisions that I've referred to here, the operational day-to-day decisions, the major operational decisions, are not the subject of challenge by councillors. But if you wanted to challenge a decision by the council, which, for example, was made cabinet, for example, you would do that by call-in, or you would look at judicial review. The alternative that is available in respect of all elements is actually, if you remain uncomfortable and you think there's a governance concern, you can raise that with external audit. So you can raise your concerns with external audit. They, as well as having a finance function, they also have a governance function, and they need to be satisfied of the correct operation of the council's governance framework and look that the council has made justified reasoned decisions within a required framework.
Can we come back?
So, Chairman, yes, I do. In terms of the opportunities external to the council, I was expecting both of those, but there are cases where the external auditors simply are not the appropriate people to be doing it, because they are already briefed by the officers and generally, if I may say, briefed against whatever it is the councillor is complaining about in terms of the decision-making process. So that actually is a very difficult avenue. The other one of judicial review, well, I suppose we all know that, but we also all know that judicial review requires very deep pockets, and it's extremely rare and unlikely that an individual is going to go down that route. I can only guess how much one would require to go judicial review, but I know that it is very, very expensive. So it simply isn't going to happen in most cases. So I think that does show up, actually, that the system is not working as well as it should. And that may be a national issue. And it may be something that, in terms of the scrutiny function around individual decision-making by officers, isn't appropriate to go to overview and scrutiny, but there is simply no other avenue in which to raise the public interest issues which councillors are here to protect. And I think the other question I asked was internally. I believe there is another committee set up under the Constitution which can effectively look at such issues. And I just wondered whether I've missed that or whether I've got that wrong, and perhaps monitoring officer can explain what it is if I'm correct. Thank you, Chairman.
Chair, on the latter point, I'm not exactly sure which committee Councillor Beasley is referring to, and unless that's an employee-related one. There are members of the public have the right to challenge the day-to-day decisions that are made. This is most common in areas around social care, and they can make complaints to the local government and social care ombudsman, should they so wish, following conclusion of a review of the decision that has been made by the complaints framework. I also feel that I just need to correct the comments that have been made about external audit. I've got an extensive experience of working with external audit around the country in various roles that I've held. I have found that, and I'm sure Grant Thornton can speak for themselves, but in my professional experience, Grant Thornton, any other external auditor, has very wide-ranging powers. They make sure and they emphasise at all points their independence. And any request for information that is received, for example, by myself, by Adam, by Graham, under the Local Audit and Accountability Act, requires a mandatory response. We do not have discretion to decide whether or not to respond to external audit. In fact, failure to respond to a formal request for information from external audit is a criminal offence. And we may be arrested if we fall foul of that. So it is not. So I would not support the assertion that officers tell external audit the view that they want. External audit, in my professional opinion, make their own decisions, and they make their own inquiries, and they make their own judgments, and they report back their own findings to the appropriate person in the organisation that they feel that the issue merits. I also should think as well that there is also quite a lot of monitors and safeguards around decision making. Mr. Stannard is here from Head of Internal Audit. Internal Audit, just as External Audit, has wide-ranging functions to make investigatory reviews around certain concerns that they may have, and that is independent of myself as a statutory officer, or it may be in conjunction with if I've got concerns. But there are wide-ranging safeguards in place to ensure that decision-making in the council is appropriate, and we are very heavily monitored and regulated around our decision-making. So I would like to just reassure members that the decision-making framework is fundamental to the organisation, and because the costs and consequences of getting this wrong are beyond significant and hugely damaging for an organisation such as this, Chair.
Yeah, thank you for that. Before I bring in Councillor Mark Howe, who's joining us online, I think Mike Cox, you wanted to make a comment?
Thank you, Chair. Actually, the monitoring officer's just taken a lot of what I was going to say away. But what I would also emphasise is that I have an independent meeting on a one-to-one basis with the external auditor without any officers present. That is a meeting that is always there, has always been taken up while I've been the the portfolio holder for finance. I believe it wasn't taken up in the previous administration at all, which was a dereliction. But I certainly have a conversation with the external auditor, independent of officers, and regularly talk to him about complaints that are made by members of the public, and we discuss any governance issues whatsoever. So there is certainly a check if anybody wants to come and talk to me about anything about what officer decisions are made.
Thank you. We've got Peter Barber still online from Grant Thornton. Grant Thornton were mentioned there by the monitoring officer. Are there any comments or observations, Mr. Barber, you want to make?
No, just really to add to the previous comments that I remain comfortable that I am able to raise concerns should they arise with officers, and if I'm not comfortable, I will seek further clarification with members as appropriate, including the portfolio holder that's just spoken. But absolutely, if I am concerned with anything governance and anything within my wider powers, I will raise those and am comfortable that I can do that without prejudice. And I am absolutely happy that on occasion it may be appropriate that I disagree with officers and we reach different judgments, and I will report and they have a response, but that will be in the public domain. We agree most of the time, we don't agree all the time, and that is how a healthy relationship between the auditors and officers should be, and I believe that exists at BCP.
Thank you for that. Councillor Beasley, then we move on.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to come back very briefly on the comments that have been made. First of all, completely agree with Councillor Cox in terms of the one-to-one meeting with external auditors for the portfolio holder for resources. In my 12 years holding that position in the form of Bournemouth Council, that's something that I did regularly, and it's right and proper that one should. I am disappointed, if I could say that, in terms of that not being the case with any of Councillor Cox's predecessors, because it's a fundamental part of the resources management and the responsibility. The second is, I just wanted to, for the avoidance of doubt, to make it very clear with Mr. Barber still on the line, that was my comments were not critical of Grant Thornton nor indeed of Mr. Barber. They were my experience within BCP Council, and if that is completely separate and independent, perhaps I need to be talking to him at some stage as well, as long as I have the assurance that that it isn't fettered by anything that he's been told externally first.
Thank you for that. Councillor Mark Howe, you've asked to contribute to this particular item. You've got questions or comments?
Yes, please. Can you hear me okay? I'm just in a corridor.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. It's just if I could just ask a question about major operational decisions and the situation where there may be a disagreement between the cabinet and officers. say for an example, there was a contract with an external organisation that was being breached, for example, and it needed, we were losing money and it needed to be stemmed, and some decision needed to be taken, but the cabinet weren't supportive of it. Is it an obligation of the officers then to designate that decision a major operational decision, and then should that be published according to the information that was shown on the slide?
Chair, the circumstances that Councillor Howell has just highlighted would be an instance where both myself and Adam, in our statutory roles, would investigate further the issue that is causing the conflict, and we would consult with the head of paid service around the appropriate course of action, and we would consult with the leader of the council, for example. So the issue that Councillor Howell is kind of a scenario where I would stop acting as a discretionary officer. I would act as a statutory officer, undertake certain inquiries to ascertain what is the problem, what is the nature of the decision, what is the area of conflict, what is the impact on the council, are there any financial circumstances, are there any reasons why we're not doing or should be doing X, Y, Z. Formulate a view. This does not mean, just for clarity, this does not mean that I would write a Section 5 report. It means I simply act in my capacity as a statutory officer, consult with Adam in his capacity as a statutory officer, definitely consult with the Chief Executive, who in his statutory role as the head of paid service, and hopefully collectively come to an informed view that is in the best interest of the council, and then present that informed view, for example, to the leader, and ascertain the correct way forward. So there's quite a lot of work that we do. There's quite a lot of giving priority to those kinds of circumstances to prevent disruption in the organisation and to prevent conflict, but it's looking for a suitable way forward and addressing the concerns.
Thank you. Councillor, how do you want to come back? Or
yes, thank you. So just at the end of that process, so if it is determined it is a major operational decision, then who does the chief executive then make that decision and it is published? Is that how it works?
No, every case is unique, and we look on a case by case basis, and it will always be a collective decision, probably of the 3 statutory officers, about the appropriate steps to be taken, and that informed view that we take will be required to be followed. But I just want to stress again that circumstances like that does not result in me taking action under the Local Government and Housing Act 1989. It is really important that I stress that. It takes a lot before I am required to consider anything more formal under Section 5. But that is an instance where the statutory officers step in. We may need to consult with head of internal audit. We may need to consult with relevant portfolio holders. We definitely consult with the leader of the council and come to a very informed view. So no, it does not mean what Councillor Howell is saying. It means that we look on a case by case basis and we dictate what would be the appropriate decision making format for that particular issue.
Thank you for that.
Can I just very quickly just because I'm still a little bit confused. So if the cabinet don't want to make the decision and the officers are saying, oh, the decision needs to be made, then presumably either the chief executive or the 3 officers together make that decision because they've determined that it has to be made, and then it is published, is it, in that scenario?
Chair, I don't particularly want to be drawn into saying yes or no in response to that. I think you have to look at the scenario that's presented on a case-by-case basis and make the best informed decision that you can based on possession of all of the facts. This is not an issue that I can right here, right now, say yes or no, and I wouldn't feel comfortable in doing that, because in doing that it would be misleading. And so I want to make sure that I'm free to make the inquiries that I need to, that I have the right to consult with the officers that I feel are necessary for it, and I want to make an informed decision on a case-by-case basis. So I will not be drawn on saying yes or no in response to that.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong, were you indicating?
Yes, thank you. I just want to pick up actually on something that Councillor Beasley said about how, as councillors, do we bring things into the public domain and question decisions that are made with regards to decisions that are in the public interest. So I'm thinking about one in particular about the service that was decommissioned, where the decision was made by an officer. I just want to understand how a decision like that came about. Looking at what you shared in your presentation about part 5 of the Constitution and also part 3 about the principles and the financial limitations, I'm just trying to understand where the decommissioning of a women's refuge, where does that sit? Was that within the financial regulations, or was that something else? Does that make sense? So that decision was taken by an officer, it was delegated to an officer. I'm just wondering why. What was the rationale behind that?
Chair, I don't think it's appropriate to go into very specific issues of decision making. I'm happy to speak to Councillor Armstrong outside of this meeting about that matter.
Can I just make a comment or query? When you do make these key decisions or major decisions, particularly in liaison with a cabinet member, relevant cabinet member, obviously sometimes these decisions are made urgently and done over the phone, but is it your or the senior officer's policy to confirm what, let's say, the cabinet member has said or agreed in a quick email saying, I note you've agreed that we should be doing this, or how is there a record made of some cabinet member supporting what your decision or recommended decision is going to be? Do you keep records?
It's good practice to keep records, but there is a formal officer decision record that is published, which is detailed, and that is available on major operational decisions. So it's not just this decision was made on Tuesday, tick this box. It has to be, it's very much similar to a cabinet report or a committee report. It has to be detailed. It has to include all of the key implications, risk, finance, legal, potential HR issues. It has to have a background to it. It has to have the circumstances. It has to have the options, has to have reasons for the decision. So it's very much like a report that you are familiar with when you go to a committee meeting, but it's called an officer decision record, and those are published by Democratic Services.
Thank you for that clarification. Yes, I do.
Thank you ever so much. I just want to check on something. It was the fact 21 days of issue kept jumping out at me and bothering me. So I'd just like to have a little bit of understanding of your position on this. So the report, once issued, suspends the decision making, absolutely, until such time as a report has been considered either by the Cabinet or Council within 21 days of issue. So report gets there's a timeline here, and I'm just wondering how drawn out that could become, or do you have authority to determine that gets shrunk so that these matters are dealt with in a very timely matter? Because often time is of the essence, and if things are drawn out and lose momentum, it could actually be detrimental.
So there is a requirement that the report, either issued by either of us, must be considered within 21 days. We have to give 5 clear days notice of a meeting. So the sooner that we can arrange the extraordinary meeting of either Cabinet or Council, the better. So usually is about 10 days. However, in the section 114 report scenario, time has to be made available for either Cabinet or Council to formally, in writing, respond, and they might not be able to do that quite quickly. So it could get in towards the end of the 21-day period, but the legislation is time limited, that the report must be either report must be considered within 21 days of issue. So it's then subject to our own publication framework. So we have to give 5 clear working days notice of a meeting of Cabinet and of Council, but for a report that has to be responded to, the organisation needs time to draft the response from issue. So But that has to be done really quickly because we ideally have to have the meeting within the 21. We do have to have the meeting within the 21-day period. If we can't meet the 21-day period, we would probably have to have a conversation with our external auditor and explain in detail the circumstances around it. So it could be, for example, that we're frustrated by bank holidays, for example, or Christmas, or illness of a significant person, or just, I don't know, it could be unique to the circumstances. But in my experience, when you issue a Section 5 report, a response usually takes about 10 days, but 5 days notice. And we have to publish everything so the members of the public can see an agenda response with 5 days notice as well. So we're subject to those publication framework.
Okay, what happens if you're on holiday?
I'm not on holiday. So when I'm acting as the monitoring officer, I'm legally responsible for the decision-making framework, and I cannot delegate the issuing of a Section 5 report, so my holiday would be cancelled. I am required to be present by law. So I am, as the monitoring officer, I am legally responsible for the decision-making framework of the council and the governance framework of the council, regardless of whether I am here or not. It doesn't mean I have to be physically present, but the nature of my role means that I'm held to account by, for example, Mr. Barber that you've seen this evening. I would be held to account for the decision making of the council. What action did I take or not take, and why?
Thank you for that. And the last question, Councillor Clare-Wait.
Yes, just wanted to check what happens in a pre-election period, either for locals or generals. I mean, you know, it's not really fair to drag you back off holiday if we're all not around, is it? But not just that, but it's probably too broad a question. But if you can, you know, to generally just say like how this scheme of delegation would change if in either of those pre-election scenarios, and is it different between generals and locals?
No, it's not really. The cabinet, members of the cabinet and the leader still have to deliver decision-making responsibilities for the council during an election, a pre-election period, because the organisation has to run. What we have to do is be careful of the nature of the decisions required to be made, and the impact that it may have, and whether it falls foul of the guidance around it politically motivates, or it politically contributes to, for example, a particular party's campaign or not. In terms of a statutory report, I've not experienced an issue where it's been an election period. We probably would have to seek advice and guidance from MHCLG as well as external audit as well about what they're comfortable with. And it would also very much depend on the topic in question or the decision that has been made or not made, the impact that it would have as well, whether it's a 114 or a Section 5 report. So there's lots of discussion that we would need to take, but we probably have to consult with MHCLG and external audit and make some very informed decisions.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the time you invested in that presentation. Very informative. Thank you very much, Janie. Moving on now to item 9 on our agenda. There's a second presentation. It's the governance surrounding the disposal of council land and property. We've got Adam Richards presenting this. He's our Chief Finance Officer. Mr. Richards, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And just for confirmation for the purpose of the tape, my name is Adam Richards. I'm the Council's Director of Finance. So the purpose of this presentation is to give you a high-level overview of the governance surrounding the disposal of council's land and property, I think as you specifically requested as part of your deep dive into certain arrangements. So I'm going to start off by maybe just giving a very high-level overview of the process map for asset disposals. So generally there's around about 8 steps. The first step is assets identified as underused or surplus. This can be undertaken by the service themselves, or this can be via, if you like, corporately led work streams. For example, we have the Asset and Accommodation Transformation work stream led by a specific officer that will be constantly looking to see if and ensure that assets are being appropriately used and their use maximised. So that's step one. Step two is if an underused or surplus asset is identified, then it will be notified to the corporate property group. The corporate property group is a group where every service of the council can have representation, and therefore it is a cross-authority officer group of all the different functions that the council perform. Step three is the corporate property group will consider, if you like, the following courses of action. First of all, it will consider whether or not it can improve the utilisation of the asset through increased occupation by relocating another team or service or potentially a third party into that asset. The second consideration or action will be consider reuse of that asset. At this moment in time, when any asset comes forward, every single one of those are first of all considered whether or not it can be used for affordable or social housing, whether it can be used for special educational needs and disability service in some way, shape or form to help us address the high needs deficit, or whether or not it potentially has any community use. If, through that process, actually no use can be identified for the asset, then it is declared surplus and moves on to, if you like, to the next step. The next step is an internal meeting between Cabinet and CMB, an informal bi-weekly strategic planning meeting where we will look to Cabinet to provide us with feedback as to whether or not they're likely to support the disposal going forward, if you like, to the more formal latter stages of the process. In considering that, they will be particularly concerned around potential community uses of that asset if services are given them, if you like, the indication or strong indication that there is no other potential service use for the asset. Clearly, what that meeting will also look for is such as officers from the Chief Exec, the Monitoring Officer, and myself as Section 151 Officer with regards to review, with regards to that specific asset under consideration. If it still goes through that process and comes out that we want to take it forward as surplus for consideration, then it will go, we will start to form the reports that will go forward to the formal process. But clearly, before that, there will be a consultation with the relevant ward councillors to obtain their view with regards to the asset and anything actually we should be considering or haven't considered previously. If it goes through all of those stages, it is then put forward to the cross-party strategic asset disposal working group. So that is quite a long title, but that is a cross-party working group that was established, I think, in the early part of 2023, and currently, that group is made up of Councillor Northover, Canavan, Bagwell, Broadhead, Dedmond, Goodall, Rice, and Salmon. And I think some of the members in this room tonight have subbed at those meetings on behalf of those councils. What then happens is it goes forward to Cabinet for decision, and if Cabinet give it the thumbs up and the green light, it will then ultimately form its way to Council for decision, depending on values. So, as indicated in that those steps, there is quite a significant and key role for the cross-party strategic asset disposal working group. I wish I could have come up with a better title. As I said, it was established in January 2023. The terms of reference of that group was to establish the capital disposal strategy for BCP Council, and in doing so, to develop a pipeline of assets for disposal which enables the funding of the transformation investment programme that we discussed earlier tonight via the flexible use of capital receipts, and that is a piece of statutory guidance. The other terms of reference was generally to strengthen public trust and transparency in the process, and initially it was required to review the regulations that the council must adhere to when it comes to disposal of assets. The cross-party strategic asset disposal working group has met 8 times from 2023 onwards, and at its first meeting it considered the detailed regulations associated with those disposals, and it has met in various periods since to consider if you like, specific asset disposals, and you're very clear that actually there were different administrations during that period, and this group has, if you like, is constant through that from its establishment in early 2023. So, as Janie outlined earlier, there are some financial regulations for the authority, and there are thresholds. The thresholds she indicate generally relate to, if you like, authority-wide matters. But when it comes to the acquisition or disposal, in answer to one of the questions that were posed at the beginning of tonight's meeting, so it relates to acquisition or disposals, there's specific financial thresholds. So up to £350,000 is a decision for acquisition disposal that can be made by the corporate property officer. Decisions between 350,000 to 500,000 is a cabinet decision, and decisions over 500,000 are a council decision. What this generally means when it comes to the acquisition or disposal of property, most of the transactions will be a council decision because of those values. And we have considered those values in the past, going through another item on tonight's agenda through the Constitution Working Party, but the message for members is that they were always comfortable with those thresholds, and please do not change them. So we continue with those thresholds moving forward and governance of this organisation. So the legal framework is very much focused around the council's best value duty. And the best value duty, the council has the legal power to dispose of assets as it sees things fit, pursuant with section 123 of the Local Government Act of 1972, subject to the requirement to obtain best value unless consent is given by the Secretary of State. When it comes to best value, we very much link it to the achievement of a Red Book valuation, a valuation undertaken by an independent third-party RICS qualified surveyor to give us, the appropriate seller, the value to acquire or dispose of an asset. It's important, though, when you actually come to look at best value, it is not necessarily always about the highest offer. Best value also, you can consider social, economic and environmental benefits as part of that process. So you can take into account the bidder and, as well as the potential values. You can look at things like the proposals for the site, job creation, social value, or using the land for a particularly desirable purpose. All of those can be considered as part of that best value consideration. When we're looking at best value duty, it's also worth just highlighting there is a general disposal consent was issued in 2003 by the Secretary of State to permit the disposal of sites at less than best consideration in certain circumstances, provided that undervalue is no more than £2 million. But they emphasised that local authorities should not disinvest themselves of valuable public assets unless they are satisfied the circumstances warrant such action, and the consent of the Secretary of State is not required, or the disposal of any interest in land at below market value, which the council considers will help to secure the promotion or improvement of the economic, social or environmental well-being of its area, provided it is below that £2 million threshold. Generally, where it comes to that general consent, my view is I've only come across it being applied in circumstances where we're actually using that site for affordable and social housing in partnership with a third party to the council. Those are the only circumstances I think I've come across where that general consent has been applied. So I will now return to the cross-party strategic asset disposal working group. Just bottom, SAD group. I'm not quite sure that the members of the group would want to be called the SAD group, but I will potentially discuss it with these members next time we meet. And when we met through that process, we've come up with a series of principles to guide, if you like, the operation of that group. It's fair to say that these principles have been tested as we've gone through its timeline because occasionally what you'll do is get people to saying, actually, we don't like principle X anymore. We want to replace it with principle Y. And that goes through, and we've had several examples of where that's been put forward, been voted on, and generally the principles that we started out with have remained in place with very little refinement. So those principles are: we will ensure sufficient asset disposals are secured to enable the Council's transformation programme to be fully funded by the flexible use of capital receipts. This will require the disposal of assets where completion can be guaranteed by the 31st of March of the relevant financial year of the required amount. So just to explain that, if you need or you intend to spend £2 million on transformation in a financial year, you can say, actually, I'll sell asset A, but asset A actually has to sell in year, because you cannot sell it after the year end and say, I'll apply it retrospectively, because that is not permissible under the statutory guidance relating to the flexible use of capital receipts. So you actually have to sell it in year. So you've got to have that like pipeline of assets coming forward to guarantee that you can fund the expenditure that it relates to. Principle 2 is that pursuant with Section 123 of the Local Government Act of 1972, we will ensure best value is achieved in respect of asset disposals by ensuring the value achieves the Red Book valuation as a minimum. We will also consider the use of overage clauses where appropriate to benefit from any future uplift in value. Principle 3 is that we will constantly challenge ourselves as to the basis for holding any asset to ensure our portfolio is managed in an efficient and effective way. Holding costs and the ability to reduce our carbon footprint will be salient matters for consideration with regards to whether or not we wish to hold an asset. We will look to dispose of surplus or underused assets, vacant land and buildings, unless there is a strong strategic rationale for holding them. For example, future service delivery, regeneration, housing or placemaking, in which case that strategic hold would then be put on the asset while those plans are developed through the appropriate officer forum. Principle 5 is, provided consistent with the other principles that we've discussed, we will support the acquisition of assets by community organisations and other public sector bodies such as town and parish councils. And the final principle is that the estates team capacity will be focused on the delivery of the required asset disposals. So if you've got a £2 million requirement in year, what you probably couldn't do is ask the estates team to look at whatever multiple of £30,000 of disposals you need to generate £2 million, because they just wouldn't have the capacity to do 300 different disposals in a year. You'd be trying to get them to focus on one or two that generate you that £2 million, which might be achievable within the year. So I suppose, members, that generally concludes my presentation with regards to the governance around the acquisition and disposal of assets. But as I said, happy to take any further questions.
Councillor Trent, your first indicate.
Yeah, it's going back to the slide of process. The process map for asset disposal. It mentions step 5, consultation with ward councillors. Is that the ward councillors that the asset is within, or would it include ward councillors who are very close? If something's almost on the border between two wards, and I'll give you an example, but it hasn't really sort of been quite the same issue. But a few years ago, we were looking at trying to get people moving out of 3 and 4 bedroom houses, and they were happy to move if they could live within the same community. And just over the boundary, at the time, it was in another authority, so it didn't really come into the measure. There was an asset which was not being sort of fully utilised, if there was consultation and it was still a live issue, I would have very much made the point that the community that I represented on one side of the road wanted somewhere that, you know, some kind of localised sheltered accommodation which would empty houses. But because it was done strictly on ward boundaries, that opportunity never arose. It doesn't seem to be quite the same live issue at the moment, but, you know, it's a general principle of, you know, if there is a ward that's adjacent or shares the same community, because the lines are drawn in all sorts of weird and wonderful places, is the consultation strictly with ward councillors, or can it take into account the closeness of an adjacent ward? Hopefully that makes sense.
Mr. Richards?
Yes, it does make sense in the sense that, you know, generally we would start with a consultation with the ward councillors the assets is in, because we appreciate that those ward councillors have a lot of local knowledge, and therefore they might be able to point us in the direction of some of the issues that you reference. However, if the asset is very close to a ward boundary, then I think we'd probably be looking at the specific circumstances and may challenge ourselves as to whether or not there should be a wider consultation of those neighbourhood wards. But, you know, I think it's on a specific example by specific example basis, you know, and what the asset is as well, as part of that process.
Councillor Clairwood?
Hey, I'm looking at Principle 1 on slide 6. How can you know that completion will be guaranteed by 31st of March? I mean, you know, your buyers pull out, things just take forever. If something does go wrong, what do you do? Just like flog it on the cheap, or, you know, you say like you have to, but you can't control what's going to happen.
You're absolutely right. You know, the buying and selling of any asset is fraught with difficulties, and so therefore what you have is that pipeline of assets. So you're not relying just on one in order to try and meet your, what you have to incur or expenditure you're incurring that in a year. You've hopefully got, if you like, you know, you hope you're aiming for 2 or 3 in the knowledge that one might not happen, and therefore you've got the other 2, plan B and plan C, to rely on as part of that process. But it needs active management of both the expenditure and the potential capital receipts to ensure the 2 balance, you know, and, you know, it can be towards the end of the year quite a worrying time if you're not quite aligned at that stage.
Any other questions or queries? I've got numerous if I wanted to, but one that does cross my mind. Not all disposals of assets are freehold. Obviously, there's long leases and things like that. But some people who own property which falls empty because the tenants moved out don't instantly think, gosh, I need to sell it. You know, the council moving out because we don't need that accommodation anymore. But actually sometimes get on and lease that property to a business tenant, perhaps, you know, a jolly good business tenant, because, you know, they're downscaling, but they do want some offices, and then they sell the investment. Is that something which, you know, the working group could think about, whereby you've got this empty factory, workshop, office building or whatever, of actually getting it leased out, because you and people do get better prices for an income producing investment. We don't want the property anymore, we want some cash in to help balance the books, but, you know, that's something that could be thought about, of actually considering leasing the property. Conversely, you may actually think, well, gosh, we need regular income. Why don't we keep the property and it's income producing to pay our day-to-day bills?
Chair, I would generally direct you to Principle 1 of the presentation, because Principle 1 is we're trying to look for a capital receipt so that we can fund under the flexible use of capital receipt, our transformation investment programme. And so therefore, you know, we are principally driven by that capital receipt. Now, clearly, you know, on a asset by asset basis, you will have those considerations as to whether or not this is an asset that could be reasonably leased either to the community or to a third party organisation. And clearly you would get an income stream through that process, but that wouldn't, in the first year, for example, be equivalent to the value of the capital receipt you potentially could get. And if you're looking for a significant capital receipts, then you've got to weigh that up as part of that process. So, I wouldn't rule out the possibility of considering it for lease. Clearly you have to consider the holding costs, as the freeholder of the asset as part of that process. But generally the principles are we are driven by the flexible use of capital receipts where we have an active transformation programme that we are looking to fund.
Nobody else indicating? I know we got the chairperson of the, whatever that abbreviation was you gave earlier. Yeah, online council. Oh, but before bringing Lisa, you can think about a question now. Councillor Mike Cox wants to ask a question.
Yeah, it's just to do with in terms of the timing, and you've already sort of indicated that it can get a bit difficult if properties haven't been sold quickly enough, and it gets a bit worrying at the end of the year. Is there any? Do you feel that you've got the necessary resources in estates, for instance, to make sure that you can get these items over the line? And is there a case that you should have more resources towards the end of a year if things are looking difficult?
Mr. Richards?
I think it's fair to say that the reasons why we might get a little bit squeaky towards the end of the year regards to disposal of assets, are not necessarily down to the resources in estates. There could be the resources in legal services, but often they are due to factors outside the council's control. So I suppose turning to the question about whether or not we're adequately resourced, that will be a constant conversation between me and my portfolio holder. In the past, we have increased the resources in states to help with the flexible use of capital receipts and the realisation of assets and the funding of our transformation programme. But it will be something that we keep constantly under review.
Councillor Lisa Northwover, hello, good evening.
Hi, thank you. I've been waiting since 6 for this to come up. I don't particularly have any questions, but it has been really useful to just hear Adam's explanation again, even though I have heard it before, and I think it is really clear, and I'm very happy with all of the processes and all of the guidance we've got to make our decisions. And it has been interesting to hear what other people think, but I don't have anything to add.
Thank you for that. I think that the last comment I could make, obviously, if you are working to tight deadlines, and you were working to tight deadlines, reference, with the previous administration selling some assets off. Obviously, auctions are one way of bringing matters to a head. Obviously, that presupposes people are going to be bidding for the properties. And I think with the properties at Airfield Road Industrial Estate, not all of them sold straight away, and I think they had to be put in the auction for a second time or even a third time. So that's something to be aware of, that if you've got a very tight deadline, it doesn't mean that the property is going to be sold. And you nevertheless, despite the fact that the properties weren't sold, all of them on time, you nevertheless were able to balance the books.
Yeah, clearly, I think you referred to the 22-23 financial year, where this authority did approach government for a capitalisation direction of £20 million. But then we decided on a different course of action, which was the disposal of some current, if you like, commercial investments, which the government is clearly encouraging local authorities not to acquire any further commercial investments. And we decided to sell 2 and one of those, capital receipts came in very close to the end of the financial year. It was via auction, but even after an auction, you've still got a cooling off period and then period for settling the account. But nevertheless, we managed to avoid that capitalisation direction through that process.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for preparing that presentation for us. It's very, very useful. That concludes business for this evening. So I would close the meeting, and it's about 9:20. So good evening, anybody who's still been with us. Thank you.